Je vois qu'il est 14h05.
Okay, it's now 2:05. We've been joined by a lot more people. So just to do a short introduction for today, for those perhaps weren't with us yesterday, or those who are joining us today, this is the 6th edition of the international training course of Cités et Cités Remarquables, which this year obviously has had to be organized online. In the course of the week, we'll be having some 90 participants in total. Yesterday there were 80 of us. Today we should be roughly the same number, participants from all over the planet. We have representatives of our partners. I see from Albania, North Macedonia, Hungary, Romania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Poland, etc. Other partners like Mali, who I see there, and India, and other countries which are taking part in the training course. Lebanon, of course, is represented, and other countries such as China, also Suriname, Mexico, Burkina Faso, Senegal, Congo, who are all present today. So we have decided to dedicate the training course to a very broad theme, that of knowledge, of the inventory and mediation and promotion of heritage. We've divided the training into 5 days after yesterday's introduction on 3 themes. First of all, inventories and knowledge today and tomorrow. Then the question of the tools to protect our heritage, which we already mentioned yesterday, and the questions of mediation and grassroots citizen participation. These themes were chosen after the last international training course in 2019, when this question of grassroots public participation on these themes came up in quite a lot of the feedback we got from the participants, which is why we included that this year. For those who are not French speakers, I remind you, you have interpreting, which is available at the bottom of the screen. You have a button where you can select English. And I would like to thank everybody, apart from the people who are speaking, to cut their microphone, as otherwise we may have a certain amount of background noise and interference. Today we have 2 French local authorities taking part, 1 regional authority, and 1 municipality. The first speaker is Roland Chabert, head of the inventory department for the Occitania region, a region in the southwest of France. He will show you where that is and present that afterwards, with the objective of showing how they have worked on their inventory to have knowledge of their heritage, which can be of interest to their local projects. Mr. Chabert will be presenting the work that has been conducted in the Occitania region on questions of inventory, and then we will have the town, the municipality of Cahors, which is also in that region, Occitania, and they will be telling us about how the knowledge of their built heritage contributes to guiding and defining the their urban projects. So the link between urbanism and heritage, and that's Laure Courget, head of their heritage department, who will be speaking. And to conclude our day's proceedings, we will have a speaker, an international speaker, one of our partners. I don't know if he's with us yet. That's Konstantin Dimitrovsky, who is an engineer and architect and works in the National Center for Conservation in Skopje in North Macedonia, who will be presenting the work done there on the inventory of the old bazaar in the city of Skopje. So for each speaker, they will have a certain amount of time, roughly 25 minutes of presentation for Mr. Chabert and Mrs. Courget. And after those presentations, after each presentation, you will have 10 to 15 minutes for questions, discussions like yesterday. The idea is that we should have some presentations, but that this is a training course. It should be interactive. There should be exchanges so that you can ask any questions you might have. And you can ask your questions in French or in English in the chat, or you can ask them afterwards when we reach the time for questions. So Mr. Chabert, I'll hand over to you. It's 10 past 2. Solène told you, I think you had about 25 minutes, 30 minutes maximum for your presentation, if that's okay with you, to present your inventory conducted by the Regional Authority of Occitania. Hello, hello, everybody, and thank you for allowing me to speak here. Hello, everybody. I am lucky enough to be the head of the Department for the General Inventory of Heritage for the Occitania region. We are in the south of France, and we have a region which covers 13 departments, counties, and I'm going to explain our work, its original features, and what we have been doing. If we can move on to the next presentation, please. Next slide, please, Solène. So, as far as the Occitania region is concerned, is we have two main cities, Toulouse and Montpellier. And previously, we were a department of the state, which was transferred to the regional authorities in 2004. And we were made a part of the Department for Culture and Heritage. In that directorate, there are 5 departments, one which deals with performing arts and contemporary art, another which addresses cultural industries, the cinema and books, another which is a broader, more transversal department which works with technologies, the Occitan and Catalan languages, a department which I head, which is the Directorate for Knowledge and the Inventory of Heritage, and then another department for development, restoration and promotion of heritage in our region. We've chosen to separate those departments which study heritage and those which deal with the subsidies for restoration of heritage to avoid having the same people doing the studies and making the decisions. At the same time, there are the other departments of the region which manage the Rieveselt Memorial, which is dedicated to the Spanish Republicans, and the Regional Museum of Contemporary Art in Sérignan. So those are 2 museums managed directly by the region with personnel who are employees of the region. And we have 2 parallel public institutions, one which manages the collections of ancient Narbonne, the Narbovia Museum, and another body which deals with the Occitan language, the Catalan language, the International Centre for Research and Documentation in the Occitan language. To give you an idea, we have 150 people in total working in culture and heritage for the regional authority. If we can move on to the next slide, it shows you how we're organized. So for the general inventory for the regional, we have 10 researchers, either general researchers or with certain specializations. I'm one of them. We have 2 photographers, 2 document specialists, and a secretary who handles all the administrative work. We are beside the Mediterranean, and the original feature of the Occitania region is that we have decided to conduct a general inventory working as a network. So for this, we signed contracts with with 5 departments, with a number of municipalities and with different local authorities, including the town of Cahors, which you'll be seeing later, to try to amplify the research work being conducted in the field. And the regional directorate, us, we quite simply oversee the organization of the documentation and the scientific value of the work that has been done, and also handle the security of the databases which are created. So that's 10 people working, salaried employees of the regional authority, to handle research. And the idea here is that this system enables us to extend, to roll out a much broader range of work, because today, in total, you have about 50 researchers in the Occitania region in 13 different departments or counties working on questions of regional heritage. So if we can move on to the next slide. So the missions we have are, the first is to, which is defined by law, is to list and to study. The next is to promote our heritage, and our region has also decided to try to create a network for this inventory. So our first role is to study all public or private heritage that is not which is not managed by a museum curator or specific staff. We study, what we often say is that we're working on everything from spoons to the cathedrals. And the only thing we are not competent to deal with is a study of landscapes, although we do have one researcher who is in charge of working on gardens in the region. So it's one thing studying, but we then also have to promote and disseminate our work. So we also have a role of making publications. You'll see several of those later, putting all our documentation online, and if possible, feeding our documentation into the databases, the national databases, so that documentation can be shared by everybody. And our particular work here in our region is that we contribute to improving the research methods and investigation methods for studying heritage. We also try to improve the professional level or the standards of our heritage professionals, provide them with new techniques, work with them on specific research, and we also propose research programs which may be of use to everybody within the region. That is what we are doing at present in Occitania. If we can move on. So to show you some examples of some of the research that's currently underway, at the moment, we're working with several universities and the French National Research Organization, the CNRS, in a study on mining in the Eastern Pyrenees, all the different forge and mining and iron working sites. And we're working with the CNRS and with different universities, including the Sorbonne University in Paris, to work on that subject, as we need different types of expertise. We also need to conduct chemical analyses of some items. So that's an opportunity for us to list all the important sites in Catalonia, in Ariège, and in other territories, but we have been focusing on the Eastern Pyrenees. We're also studying at present, we're doing a specific study on brick and tile works. That's a subject, a very frequent feature in our region with its clay. So we're studying different sites which are currently disused or being converted to other uses and which are going to be reorganized. And we also have the possibility of conducting emergency operations. We often work to order to help local politicians who need to define how to handle an industrial brownfield site to see how what we can do in terms of documentation and keep a trace of what was done there. We've also studied a number of factories, plants of the company Laticoair, who produced aircraft, plants which have been bought by the region and to transform them into offices. And before that was done, we studied those sites before they were turned into office space. Next slide. Our current subject, which we're currently fine-tuning. There are two of them, in fact. The first is a study of spa towns and activities. We've been working a lot in-house in studying spa architecture. We have the upper Languedoc area where there is a spa town called Lamalou-les-Bains, and there is a researcher in the team who's working on the study of that village. We've also set up a European research project with the universities of Toulouse, Perpignan and Pau to conduct an inventory of all the spa town tourist architecture in the Pyrenees, in the Pyrenean mountains, from Port-Bou in the east to the west end of the Pyrenees in the Aquitaine region to have a comprehensive study. We're currently completing that work. That should be finished in the coming months. And in that way, we have surveyed all that heritage, and we have created an application, which can be used by people on their mobile phone to see all the different interesting places nearby when they're out hiking or when they go for a spa treatment in a spa town. And that's the University of Bayonne, which developed that tool. We've also been working a lot, we're also a wine growing region, and we've been working on the wine chateau and cooperative wineries of the region, and those which were built by a family of architects, the Garros family of architects. They did a lot of work around Montpellier, the city of Montpellier, also around the towns of Narbonne and Béziers. And today we have more than 70 files which are currently being prepared to be published online, pending a paper hard copy publication. Next slide. Each of our researchers in the regional authority has their specialities. We have two large canals through the region, the Canal du Midi and the lateral canal to the Garonne River, and we've studied the areas on 1 kilometer either side of the canal to study the heritage there. We've also been working or are working on medieval civil architecture, the houses, the homes, the farms of the region, which date back to medieval times, which are currently being studied. And we've got almost 200 files being studied there. We also have a specialized researcher who's working on monumental paintings, their conservation and restoration. And for that purpose, we're working. For this, we do it department or county by county. Of the 13 departments at present, 8 so far have been studied. There are 5 more to do. And there have been some interesting discoveries made there. And we're also working currently on contemporary architecture with a study of a particularity of the French system, the 1% for art system. Each time a public building is created, there's an obligation to dedicate 1% of the budget to a work of art. So these works of art, that's something that started in the 1960s, even a little bit before. And our work is to list today all these works of art, which have been financed by this 1% for art system, to have documentation on those works of art, perhaps have them restored. Many of them are in schools, high schools, hospitals. So they do need to be protected. If we could move on to the next slide. And alongside this work, which is what we conduct directly at the region, is we also have our network, which is perhaps a more operational inventory. That's what you'll see with my colleague from the town of Cahors afterwards. We're currently taking part We're working with the protected districts of the town of Lectoure, also the remarkable heritage site of the town of Rodez, and we're working with them on their documentation, helping them to get photographs, and also providing support for the supervision of the safeguarded protected district of Montauban. And we're thinking of working on the restoration of protected objects. This is currently the case in the Lot, Tarn-et-Garonne, and the Eastern and High Pyrenees. And our work also aims to collect documentation which has been prepared in the inventories and try to get that up to standards so that it can be included in the databases of the region and the national government and placed at the disposal of everybody. So here you have some examples in the slide of the different areas where we're working, notably in the area, the Entente Cossé-Cévennes, where we have an obligation to support the UNESCO sites which don't have the necessary personnel, so to help them in their inventory in putting that together. This can be complicated in certain regions. So we're also conducting some appraisals and providing expert assessments, notably for the 1% for Art program I mentioned earlier, where we're working directly to assess the condition of the works which are endangered or in a dangerous condition. We are also working with local authorities in studies, anthropology studies. We have done some carbon-14 dating. We also have archaeological survey work that's done to provide, as this costs a lot of money, it's the region which covers some of this work for our colleagues in the local authorities which need that work to be done. And the next slide, the final point. So we're doing studies of how to safeguard this heritage. For example, here what you have on the slide is in the town of Grenade. We studied a house before it was demolished. In fact, and we realized that this house, which has now been demolished, had been a brothel during the First World War and now has been replaced by a swimming pool, but we did get this documentation about the house, which means we now have a trace of this in the databases, and all of that was drawn, studied, and listed. Our work at the moment also consists in helping the middle and high schools. Today, the high schools are managed by the regional authorities. It's the regional authorities that construct the buildings and which handle the restoration of buildings, and in particular their collections. So we have been active in a certain number of high schools, especially in Toulouse, to study the collections, the old collections they had there, notably of objects from geography. So here you see some of those objects on the slides here, which I can show you. We can move on to the next slide now. So our mission in this work in the region is to disseminate this work, this knowledge. We have a scientific journal, a digital scientific journal, which is dedicated to publishing the scientific results of our work. We also have an internet portal, which is there to disseminate knowledge. And I'll show you some slides afterwards, if we can move on. Our work also consists in supporting the publication of books on research that has been done in the region. You've got two examples here of two books published this year. One about a small castle, that's a regional collection, which is published and managed by the regional authority. The second is in the Cahier du Patrimoine, a national collection of publications. And there we have two books which are being prepared, one which came out in July this year and another which should be coming out in coming weeks, which is dedicated to the architecture and urbanism of the town of Rodez, where we're helping the work on the inventory.
Donc, notre travail, c'est aussi effectivement de...
Our work also consists in making all that documentation available, all the documentation, all the data that is collected in the regional database is converted into open data, which is then placed at the disposal of the public on different websites. There's a data website for the region. We also work with the Atlas des Patrimoines, the Heritage Atlas. You see an example there for the Tarn-et-Garonne department or county. If we can move on to the next slide. Our role also consists in, on the website of the region, we have a website dedicated to heritage, and with multimedia content. The latest item there is a photographic discovery of the Christ of Zadkin, a work of art installed in a church in the Tarn-et-Garonne area. That links in with an exhibition that's currently being held at the Beaubourg Center in Paris, and as the statue of the Christ is a tree which was sculpted on site and couldn't be transferred to Paris, we did some documentation work to describe that work. We also have an interactive map of the different pilgrimage routes to Santiago de Compostela in Spain, and that is all done with data that has been collected. And obviously our key role is to enhance and share all the documentation. On the website, you can do simple searches with very easy to use search engines, and there you have all the documentation that is available about towns. For example, the town of Lavore here, where we have 1,114 results of houses, churches, documents for the architecture and objects in that local authority, in that municipality. Next slide. A part of our documentation, and today we have over 100,000 files, a part of that documentation is placed in the national databases, the Mérimée and Palissy databases. The website of the Ministry for Culture today is the POP, the Open Heritage Platform, and there we've published more than 47,000 files on the national database, and that's just for our region of Occitania. And the final slide gives you an idea of our work. There you have an idea of all the documentation we have in the region for each municipality. 60% of the municipalities in Occitania have at least one inventory file, and we provide them depending on their needs, depending on their demand. We propose to guide them scientifically in their work on their documentation, and there you have it. Thank you, Mr. Chabert, for that presentation, that very clear presentation that shows all the work and the importance of conducting an inventory of heritage. I don't remember if you said so at the beginning, but this sort of inventory is a new power of the regional authorities here in France, although the regions have had that power for 15 years now. Initially, it was the role of the state, and that is now handled by the regions. What I find very interesting is that we see here that the inventory is very broad. You said from the spoon to the cathedral. So it's an inventory which is often the first pillar in the effort to conserve and to promote heritage. And this inventory, I would say, is open and available knowledge here, it is interesting that this knowledge should be openly available, and that links in with the themes of grassroots participation, which we'll come back to later in the training. And an inventory also corresponds to the challenges and the projects of the local territories, as you showed through the different networks and partnerships that have been created. And I'll take this opportunity just to remind you that the Occitania region is a partner of Cités, and so there are joint actions which are conducted. The Occitania region was the first region to be a partner of our association, Cités Remarquables. And just to give you an idea, I was looking at the surface area, the area of Occitania to give our participants an idea. The Occitania region actually was created by a merger of two French regions. Now I was just looking, it represents 70,000 square kilometers. So it's a very large region. So if we compare this with country we have here, like the Democratic Republic of Congo or China, it might seem small, but we have other countries which are smaller. I was thinking in Central and Eastern Europe, or where the Occitania region is larger than some countries. And before we move on to Laure Conger's presentation, I think she's doing a test there to see how to share her screen. We'll perhaps come back to the general view of the participants. Do any of the participants have any questions or remarks further to Mr. Chabert's presentation? And there's a comment in the chat that the Occitania region is 7 times larger than Lebanon. I'm just looking to see if there's anything in the chat. So I'll suggest a first question just to get things going so that you can, to give you time. Mr. Chabert, I wanted to know, on the question of the partnership with the local territories, you talked about operational inventories. Is this something which has been done recently? Is it something that is fairly natural or easy to set up? Or is there a lot of demand for this sort of inventory locally? It's a choice that was made right at the beginning when we set up the inventory directorate at the regional authority. We wanted to work closely with the local territories to have competent departments in the field with powers for studying heritage. We worked a lot with the different towns of art and history, the different towns who had protected districts or historic districts, and our partnerships have enabled the region to work more broadly. We finance about half of the people there who are working in the territory, and that's more efficient, in our opinion, to have these people working with the local politicians who are responsible for heritage or property, to have this advisor who's there to help them. So we can provide a much quicker response by having these people in the field rather than always contacting the central authority in the region. And that it's also a way of providing jobs in local authorities for young researchers. Thank you for that answer. I see several questions coming from Lebanon. You said that power was transferred from the state to the region. How is the financing managed, and what is the role of the private sector? The law prohibits any work with associations, non-profit associations, or the private sector. Otherwise, we can commission, we can place orders with them. So in that case, we try to work with the local authorities so that is something durable, sustainable. For documentation that we collect and the money that's given to the local authorities must be of benefit to the public. So generally, we only work with local authorities, even if some of the personnel we work with. And for the organization, the principle is that all the documentation that we collect is pooled, is shared for the whole of the public community and all the partners in the inventory. So when a new partner joins us from the Gare department, they have access to all the documentation and all the information from colleagues at the other side of the region. And I have two other questions, which I'm passing on to you. How does it work for the coordination with the other local authorities? Does everybody have access to the inventory? And for the methodology, do you have any pre-designed data sheets to help you in your inventory? We have forms which are prepared with a certain number of mandatory fields that need to be filled out in the databases. There is a national method with a certain number of fields to be filled out. In Occitania, we tried to adapt that national method to each specific case, each local authority, according to their issues. So, for example, the work we're doing at present in the town of Lectoure, which is monitoring the protected historic district of the town, is different from the work we're doing in the town of Prades in the Eastern Pyrenees, where we're conducting a diagnosis of heritage buildings. So there is a first level of documentation which is standard for the databases, and then we have the possibility of working on different themes or different aspects of the research. And the inventory, in fact, is never finished. We can always keep on going. And do you have other sources of financing? That's another question from the chat. No. In fact, the financing of the inventory is provided through public subsidies from the regional authority and public money from the local authorities who are our partners. There's no other source of funding than that money. And it's a shame. And regarding the accessibility of the documents, this is Serge Hervé asking this question, can the general public, can we have access to the forms in the inventory? You have access to all the files in the inventory on the site of the region. There are about 200,000 files which are online. All those which have been validated, which are scientifically sound, have been published online. You have some files which are confidential or for works which are very fragile or which belong to private owners. We try not to put that documentation online if it's information about a private individual's home. For that, you need authorized access to that, secure access to that information where there might be private data. And it's just a part of the documentation is published in the national databases so that it can be mixed in with the data from all our colleagues throughout the country. Thank you. Are there any other questions from anyone? I would have liked to ask you whether the role of your department is an obligation for the municipalities, or are you just there to advise them when they need help? Or our power for the inventory is mandatory. The local authorities can do this work themselves. The only thing is that generally there's no guarantee that the work will be done in accordance with the rules and can then be shared with the other local authorities of Occitania. We're just there to guarantee, to oversee the fact that everything is done in accordance with the rules and standards and that that information can go into a national database. Are there any other questions? I know that this question of knowledge and the inventory is important. I see some local authorities here who have done work themselves on inventories in Elbasan, for example. And there was a question from Albania there, and it's also the case in other partner towns, like in Travnik in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Sabina Mastic, who is there with us today, works a lot on questions of the inventory of heritage. Also in Mali, we have had partners who work on a day-to-day basis on these questions. Are there any other comments or questions from anyone? Either via the chat or if you'd prefer to activate your microphone.
Bon, je ne vois pas. Si, oui, Georges.
Georges perhaps has a question. Thank you. For us here in Bobo Dioulasso, we have a lot of built heritage from the colonial period, which is not listed and is not in an inventory. That's work we need to do. And I've seen the question has been asked of whether there are forms which are available, which might guide us in that work. And the aim of this sort of what is the purpose of this inventory? What is ultimately what you do with that information afterwards? Once the inventory is done, what's it for? And what work is done on the information in that inventory? That's the question I wanted to ask. As a general rule, there are forms that we have, and we're working at present with Cambodia and the town of Battambang, where we have set up a methodology, and we can provide the tool, the database tool to help everybody to work on this. The other point is that our work is just limited to keeping the information and making it available to whoever wants it. If there are guided visits, if there are books being worked on, we know that we have documentation that we file, that we have in the archives, and which can be provided. And to the extent possible, we also try to help with conservation and restoration. And we know that when works are being studied and analyzed, as the information is on internet and there is all that data, the works also as they're referenced on internet are more difficult to steal internationally. So, and we also can see whether there can't be conservation or restoration work. And we also see whether our colleagues can perhaps, other colleagues can perhaps not deal with having some of the works protected as well. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? I think I saw a question from Tony Sade from Ainata. Tony, would you like to ask your question directly to Mr. Chabert? If Mr. Sade would like to ask his question directly. Tony, I see that, I don't know if it was a question you had regarding how we go from the process of a monument to a heritage. Could you perhaps clarify exactly what you meant? Ask your question yourself.
En attendant que ça fonctionne, je crois qu'il y avait une question d'Aruna.
I think there was another question.
Oui, bonjour.
Hello.
Alors, ça va, vous me voyez?
Oui, oui.
Can you see me? Yeah, we can see you. We can hear you. I want to know, with your experience, can you share that experience with other local authorities and provide expertise, show us how the inventory is done, or the forms you use? Of course, we can always download information, but we don't have detailed explanation. It's not so easy. So can you do assignments and come and share your experience with other local authorities? We are always ready to share that experience with other local authorities. The organization in France, however, requires that if you need that expertise, we will first need an authorization from the Ministry for Culture. But after that, there's no problem sharing the experience with you. The idea is, in fact, that in the region we can host interns or students, train them, show them how it works, and then send them out into the field so that they can work. And that's what we're trying to do with Cambodia at the moment. So we go for a week to train students in archaeology of buildings, in creating the inventory forms and documents, and then they work on their own, and we have regular reviews with these people to see how it's going. The important thing is that you should also have the IT system that enables you to safeguard, to keep your data, and the region, we could imagine our region helping foreign and local authorities to work on how to save data. So this can be done, but for this, we quite simply need a cooperation agreement. Are there any other questions? Yeah, I see a question from Svetanka, which I will translate directly. After finishing the inventory phase, do you have any sort of expert body or inspection body or team which is responsible for monitoring and collecting the information from the field? I would also like to know what kind of equipment you use to prepare the documentation. The documentation. So it's the regional authority which is there to oversee, to supervise the work which is done in the field. And that's why we work in partnership. So we finance the work of the project officers who do the work. We train them and we guide them, support them throughout their work. And we only pay the grant or the subsidy to the town hall or to the local authority once we have a guarantee that the work is being done properly. And the bulk of the work is field work, where you have to go into the field and see what heritage there is, photograph it, draw it, and then work, do all the archival work in the archives to track all the history as far back as possible for that heritage. So it's very basic research work. It's just a question of organization and time. And another question, what is the annual budget allocated to the inventory and to protection and conservation? To give you an idea of the budget for knowledge, the regional budget, all the money together for the region is 500,000 euros. And as we provide half of the financing, that means there is a budget of 1 million euros a year for the knowledge and documentation. And then there is 5 million euros, which is dedicated to conservation and restoration of the heritage. And I see one last question, unless there are others. What are the main difficulties you have encountered in the inventories that you have conducted so far? The biggest difficulty that we encounter is that everyone loves their heritage. Everyone is convinced that they know what their heritage is, and everyone thinks they're capable of doing that inventory themselves. And they often say, when I go to the dentists, I prefer to have a qualified dentist who looks after my teeth because it's dangerous if not. So that's the problem we often have, is this the concern we also have is that sometimes it never goes quickly enough, because there are people who want to do promotion or to exploit the heritage for tourist activities, want to go more quickly, and we don't have the time to do all the in-depth research we would like to do. Very good. I'm just looking to see if there are any other questions. I don't have the impression that there are. So next, we have Laure Congé, Director of the Heritage Department of the town of Cahors, who is going to be speaking. Mr. Chabert has already mentioned the town of Cahors. She's going to talk about the operational inventory that was conducted there, of their heritage, and all the old buildings of the town of Cahors. Laure Courget is very busy, and at this very moment she is stuck on a restoration worksite, a heritage restoration worksite. We've just spoken to her on the phone. She said she would try to get to the office as quickly as possible. She should be with us in 5 minutes or so. I don't know if we have the possibility of reversing the order of the presentation. If Konstantin Dimitrovsky can do his presentation, if he's with us. Otherwise, we have a possibility of having a short break of 5 to 10 minutes while we wait for Laure Courget. When we do the classroom training, we always have a break. So I suggest we'll have a break until 3:05, and then back in 10 minutes time. And by then, I hope that Laure Courget will be with us and that she can talk to us about the town of Cahors, if that's okay with all of you.
Alors, pour information, Laure Courget vient d'arriver au bureau. Je suis en direct.
Laure Courget has just arrived in the office. She's just logging in. So we'll be starting in a few moments' time.
Laure, est-ce que tu nous entends bien? Oui, Laure. Voilà.
Bonjour, bonjour à tous.
Hello, everybody.
Ouais, je vous entends pas bien. Alors, pourtant, j'avais un système fantastique, soi-disant.
Can you hear us or not?
Oui, je suis en train de parler là.
Ah ouais, ben, c'est pas terrible. Bon, est-ce que moi, vous m'entendez bien?
Can you hear me?
On t'entend très bien, oui.
We
Alors,
can
donc,
hear
c'est
you
essentiel.
perfectly. Okay, that's the main
On va
thing.
juste répéter les questions si je les entends pas
You'll
bien.
just need to repeat the questions if I don't
Dis-moi,
hear
ils sont
them.
nombreux à être de langue anglaise ou pas?
Are there a lot of people who are English speakers or not? I haven't done an exact count. I really don't know how many people are English speakers or French speakers. There are 65 of us. I think the majority are French speakers. Probably about 20 English speakers and about 40, 45, but there's simultaneous translation into English with Gary, who will be translating.
Donc, on peut commencer quand tu veux.
Okay, we can begin when you want. Well, in that case, go ahead. Everybody is going to be coming back. Everybody is activating their cameras. So the second presentation of the afternoon. Earlier, we've been listening to Roland Chabert, who was talking about the inventory for the Occitania region. He already mentioned the town of Cahors and the operational inventory in the different local authorities, like and the contracts which are signed, like in Cahors, Rodez, or other towns. Sorry, I'll put my camera back on as well. And the objective of the presentation is to show, we have seen at the regional scale now, but in a town like yours, today among the 70 international participants, we have a lot of people are from local authorities in towns or associations in a town and who address this question at a local level, the town, how to promote, how to do an inventory of their heritage, which is why we would like you to give this presentation on the inventory, the operational inventory of the old buildings as a means of guiding your urban projects, to see how this detailed knowledge of your old buildings, of your heritage, enables you to guide or to modify your projects for restoration of a street, a building, or a whole town. And in your case, if you could tell us about the town of Cahors. I am going to share your PowerPoint. I'll get that onto the full screen presentation. Can everybody see the presentation? Laure, do you see your presentation? Yep. That's okay. So Laure, in that case, if you would like to begin and you tell me when you want me to switch the
Bonjour à toutes
slides.
et à tous.
Hello, everybody.
Merci, merci d'être
Thank
présent, en
you
fait, d'être là.
for
Et puis
being
d'écouter un peu
here and
l'expérience
for
de
listening
Cahors
to the
par rapport, en
experience
effet,
of
à cette
Cahors
nécessité et cette importance
and
de l'inventaire
the
et de la connaissance
importance
sur le
of the
patrimoine pour
inventory and the knowledge of
aller
our
vers une meilleure
heritage
gestion de
in
ces
order to
ensembles, qui
move
sont tous
towards
des
more
ensembles pour la plupart qui
effective
appartiennent à des propriétaires privés.
management of
Donc
our
avec ce gros
towns
travail de
and of
sensibilisation qui est
these
nécessaire,
buildings which often
et de
belong to private owners,
persuasion quelque part, voilà.
and
Mais par le biais de la connaissance, en fait,
how
on y arrive.
through
Dans un
knowledge we
premier
can
temps, et
manage
c'est ce
this.
que
First of all,
Jonathan va dérouler, c'était une
if
présentation du
Jonathan
territoire,
can
pour que vous ayez un
shift the
peu une
slide,
vision
is to give you
de
an
ce à quoi
idea
ressemble Cahors,
of
ceux
what
qui ne le
Cahors
connaîtraient pas, hein,
looks like
en
for
termes à
those
la
who aren't
fois
familiar
de densité
with it,
urbaine, mais
terms of
aussi
density
d'implantation sur
and
un
in the
méandre, hein, c'est une
layout
boucle
of
de
the
la
town,
rivière,
in a
qui
meander
donne une
of
configuration
the
assez
river
particulière avec des
lot
collines tout autour.
with the hills
Tu peux
on
continuer
all
à dérouler.
sides. You can continue moving on
S'il
to
te
the
plaît,
next.
Jonathan.
And the
Merci.
population is
En
43,000
effet, il
in
faut
the
aussi
urban
avoir
area.
une bonne idée de ce
Also,
que
we need to have a good
donne,
idea
de ce qu'est un territoire. Et en effet,
of
pour
what
Cahors, c'est
our
une ville
local
médiévale.
territory
Alors,
is.
c'est ce que je
Cahors
disais
is
tout
a
à l'heure.
medieval
Pourquoi, en fait,
town,
au-delà des éléments qui apparaissent maintenant et qui sont apparus au
and
fil des
apart
années,
from all the things you can
comment on est
see
arrivé
on
à
the
cette
screen,
identité médiévale
how
forte et qui est
is
terriblement
it that
liée,
we
en effet,
have
aux missions
this
d'inventaire
strong
qui avaient démarré en
medieval
1988.
identity
Comme
today,
quoi, la connaissance
which we have
de
covered in our
l'inventaire est
inventory
majeure
since
et essentielle.
1988.
Des enjeux patrimoniaux forts repérés.
There are some key heritage
Continue.
issues or challenges for us, if you can
Avec,
continue.
vous voyez sur ces deux
And
images,
you see here on
Cahors a un
these
patrimoine qui
images,
est très masqué,
Cahors has
par des embûches,
heritage,
pour la
which
plupart
a
du
lot
temps
of
qui
which
sont
was
dues aux
hidden
interventions du
by
19e et puis au début du
rendering
20e
on
siècle.
the buildings which had
Et
been
l'objectif
installed in the
étant de
19th
retrouver
century.
cette épaisseur
And the idea was to
historique. Hein,
get
c'est
back to the
en fait
historic
cette ville qui se
nature
reconstruit sur
of the
elle-même en
walls.
permanence, ces
It's a
bâtiments qui
town
bougent en
which has been
permanence,
constantly
mais qui
built
en fait
and
racontent une
rebuilt,
histoire et qui permettent
but which
aussi
tells a
d'aller
story
vers des qualités
and also
d'habiter
enables
aussi.
us to
Continue.
understand the town.
Continue, s'il te plaît. Merci. Voilà, des enjeux majeurs. Là, je vous ai mis comme
Some key
exemple,
issues here.
reviens en arrière.
If you could just
30
come backwards
secondes.
there.
Ce qu'on appelle des maisons
What here
qui sont
what we call our
d'une forme et
tower
d'une typologie
houses.
assez particulière. Hein.
Our houses are
On en
rather
repère en
strange
Europe un
shape.
certain nombre, mais c'est malgré
There
tout
are
assez
some
rare.
others elsewhere
Et
in
avec
Europe,
comme
but it's
angle
quite
fort
rare.
l'état actuel, qui est vraiment la photo
And it's
tout à
one
droite,
of the key
et surtout le
challenges that we
travail que
have
l'on a
in the work, to
entre
see the work that we can do
connaissance, inventaire, restitution, et
to
les enjeux par
familiarize
rapport à
ourselves
l'image
with
même de
these
la ville
buildings and
et
to
à ce qu'elle
understand the
nous raconte
image
comme
of the
histoire et
town and
même
to
en
see
qualité
what the
d'habitation.
image tells us in
Continue.
terms of our history.
Sur la suite des éléments, en fait, on a aussi au-delà de
We
cette image
also have,
très médiévale
in
hein, de la
addition to this
ville
very
ancienne,
medieval
c'est aussi
image
un
of
fort
the
marqueur
town,
qui est donné par
we
le 19e
also
siècle
have a key
et qui est présent
marker from the
dans pas
19th
mal
century,
d'endroits.
as
Continue.
in many places.
Jonathan, s'il te plaît.
Jonathan, if you could
Voilà.
move on to the next
Avec
slide.
un axe majeur qui est l'axe
With
médian,
our
qui est
main
l'axe majeur
street
nord-sud,
down
avec ces
the
immeubles
main
recomposés et reconstruits
north-south
au 19e
street, with
siècle,
these buildings which were
souvent à
all
partir d'éléments
reconstructed in the
médiévaux, bien
19th
sûr, parce qu'on
century,
a du
often on the
Moyen-Âge
basis
partout et jusqu'au
of
comble,
medieval
avec des
features
découvertes très intéressantes
and some very interesting
effectuées dans ces
discoveries to be
bâtiments-là
made
à
there
l'occasion des
in
suivis de
those
chantier.
buildings when
Continue.
there is work going on.
Continue.
If you could
Je
move
peux
on to
passer
the
la
next
diapo, merci, suivante.
slide.
Continue aussi. Des outils de protection, ça
So,
aussi c'est
for
important.
the protection systems, this is
On a,
also
au titre de
important.
l'UNESCO, deux bâtiments
We
majeurs qui
have
sont des
two
composantes de ces
major
biens
buildings
totalement immatériels qui
for
représentent le chemin de
UNESCO
Saint-Jacques-de-Compostelle
on
pour la partie
the
française,
pilgrimage
avec
routes
deux
to
bâtiments majeurs
Santiago
de
de
part et d'autre,
Compostela
vous
in
voyez,
Spain. So
sur le plan
two
de la ville,
key
que sont la cathédrale
features in the town, the
Saint-Étienne sur le
cathedral,
flanc est,
St.
et puis le pont
Stephen
Valentré,
Cathedral,
qui est un pont
and
médiéval
the
début
Pont
du XIVe siècle,
Valentré
qui est
Bridge from
érigé
the
de l'autre
early
côté.
14th
Donc,
century
important de
on
ces
the other side
bâtiments-là,
of the town. The
important aussi pour la
importance of these
protection et pour la connaissance,
buildings,
parce que ça
it's also
permet
important in
aussi
terms of
de
knowledge because
sensibiliser
it's
le
a way
public.
for us to
C'est
raise the
majeur.
awareness of the public,
Continue.
and that's always very important. And you can move on now
S'il te
to the
plaît.
next slide.
Autre élément majeur de
Another
reconnaissance de l'impact
important
patrimonial,
feature of the impact of
ce sont les
heritage
protections
is
monuments
the
historiques. Et au titre des monuments
historic
historiques, avec les
monument
périmètres qui vont
protection
autour,
system
et qui sont
with historic
autant
monuments
d'éléments
which are
majeurs
protected and a
pour,
certain
là
radius
aussi,
around them.
sensibiliser, amener les
And there
publics
we
vers ces
need to
périodes
raise
historiques,
awareness
puisqu'on
of
a
the
des périodes
public
historiques très
of
variées,
these
entre,
different
qui
periods
vont
of
aussi bien de
history.
l'Antiquité
We
jusqu'au
have
XIXe siècle, avec
monuments
deux
from
exemples,
ancient times through to the
un arc
19th
islamique qui est d'un
century.
ancien terme romain,
You
et
have
puis un
an
élément de
arch
fenêtre
there
que
from
vous
the
apercevez sur
Roman
la droite,
period,
qui
and
est
then
un
the
très bel exemple de
windows on
Renaissance,
the right, which are a
inséré
magnificent
dans un bâtiment
example
XIIIe
of
siècle
Renaissance
préexistant.
architecture in a
Continue.
13th century medieval building.
Et un centre historique
And the
qui est
historic centre,
repéré, qui est protégé
which
depuis
is
1973
protected and has been
au
protected
titre
since
de ce que Malraux avait
1973
instauré comme les secteurs
under the
sauvegardés, qui sont
Malraux
devenus,
law
par le biais
on
des différentes
protected
réformes,
historic
dorénavant
districts,
des sites
which we
patrimoniaux
now
remarquables,
call
donc
remarkable
des SPR,
heritage
mais qui
sites,
ont comme particularité
SPR
d'avoir un
in
document
French,
d'urbanisme spécifique,
but for
qui
which
est un
there are
plan de sauvegarde et
specific
de mise en valeur.
urbanism documents and a
Vous
promotion
voyez la
and
densité de la
protection
ville qui
system.
apparaît en
You can
mauve
see the density
sur la
of
photo,
the
où on
town
a en effet 1600 parcelles, 2100 bâtiments,
with
autant de bâtiments à
2,100
interroger, donc
buildings
à en faire
and
l'inventaire,
lots of
et
separate
donc à mieux
plots of land,
accompagner les travaux
all
qui vont
to
arriver
be
derrière.
inventoried, so a lot
Continue.
of work to be done there.
Continue encore, s'il te plaît.
If you could move on to the next slide.
Ce travail d'inventaire préalable,
So this
la diapo d'avant,
prior
ce travail
inventory
d'inventaire
work, back one,
préalable a permis,
has
quand on a mis en
enabled
révision
us,
le règlement,
when we
de
reviewed
permettre
our
de progresser
regulations,
terriblement dans les
to
protections de
progress,
bâtiments eux-mêmes.
to make
Tout ce
progress in
travail
the
d'inventaire
protection
qui avait
of
été
the
mené
buildings.
par
That's
l'État
why
à partir de
we have the
1988
inventory.
sur la ville de Cahors jusqu'en
In
2004,
Cahors, the
a
inventory
permis
was
en effet,
conducted
quand on
from
met en révision le règlement
1988 through
en
to
2010,
2004. So in
de
2010, when we
progresser
reviewed
énormément sur la
our
connaissance du bâti,
regulations,
même si
it was
400
possible
en fait,
we had made a
bâtiments avaient
lot of
été
progress in
étudiés sur les
our
1600,
knowledge of
sur les
the buildings.
2100 même
Even back in
repérés.
1975, there were
Néanmoins, ça avait
400
permis de
buildings had
révéler
been included in
cette
the inventory,
épaisseur médiévale
but we had much
potentielle sur
greater,
l'ensemble
more
des
detailed
bâtiments qui
information
formaient le centre historique.
later of the
D'où l'importance d'une
buildings in the
protection
historic
forte
centre, and
et
hence the
d'où
importance
l'importance
of
de
having a
mener une
good
étude au
protection
quotidien
system
pour
and of doing
alimenter
daily
cette
study
protection
efforts to
de
feed
première
this
intention,
protection
pour vous le
system
dire.
by
Continue.
providing the necessary information. Just for information,
Oui.
the problem is that every time I
Ah, pardon,
press,
excuse-moi.
it takes about 3 seconds for the slide to move
Excuse-moi.
forward.
Donc, je ne
That's
dirai
why
plus rien.
there's a
Je suis
small
désolée.
delay, a
Donc, en
short
fait,
delay.
ce travail des
And
connaissances
là,
s'inscrit dans une
so
politique
this
générale
is all
globale
part of a
portée par
general
les élus. Sans
policy.
politique globale générale, on ne
With that,
peut
if
pas
you don't
mener dans de
have
bonnes
a
conditions une mission
global
d'inventaire. Parce qu'il faut en
comprehensive
faire
policy, you
comprendre et le
can't
sens,
conduct an inventory
l'intérêt et
because you
l'intérêt
need to
à
share the
très long terme,
interest and the meaning
dans
of
le
this over
cadre
the
d'un
long
intérêt de
term
conservation, de préservation
for
et de
conservation
transmission.
and for
Il
preservation
faut
and to
transmettre
hand
ces
down
biens
this heritage. We must
pour
hand
les
down
générations qui vont
this
suivre,
heritage
mais
to
il faut les
future
transmettre avec tous les
generations,
outils de
but
connaissance
we must hand
nécessaires
it down with all
pour
the
qu'ils puissent
necessary
comprendre ce
knowledge
qu'on leur a
and
transmis.
tools so
C'est
that
ça
people
l'importance
understand
ici
what
de
we're
la
handing
rigueur.
down to them.
C'est qu'on
That's also
comprend
the role of the
pourquoi on a mené ce
inventory, to
travail, pourquoi on
understand
continue à le
why the
mener
work has been
et
done,
pourquoi
why
il
we're
doit
continuing to do
accompagner
it,
dans un
and why
quotidien de
this
gestion. C'est
must
important. Inscrit
guide
dans une
our
politique globale.
management on a
Et
day-to-day
là, je vous ai
basis
mis des
with
slides
a
avec les
global
traductions
policy.
pour ceux qui étaient
Here
anglophones,
you
mais
have some
entre ces
slides with
différents
some
types de
English
politiques,
information
une
also to help
restauration
you.
patrimoniale qui prend en
So
compte
for the
en effet
restoration
l'amélioration de
of the
l'habitat,
heritage, we have to
et on
take
voit
account of
bien à travers
improving
des
the
cas
housing
concrets,
conditions, but at the
dont
same
on verra
time, we
deux
can see
exemples
through a number
après,
of examples, which I'll show
comment
you
la
afterwards,
connaissance
we can see how
permet
knowledge
d'apporter de la qualité
enables
d'habiter.
us to
Parce que par des restitutions, souvent,
bring
d'états
additional
antérieurs,
quality to
on
housing
revient sur des redécoupages abusifs faits les siècles suivants,
and
qui
to
avaient leur raison
avoid
d'être à ce moment-là.
errors.
Mais en revenant à un état plus ancien, en fait, ça permet d'aller beaucoup plus vers une qualité d'habiter.
And this enables
Importance
us
des
to
réaménagements
do
aussi, accompagnement des
interesting things
espaces publics. Bon, je ne vous
also.
explique pas ce qui est sur la slide, vous l'avez lu. Pour poursuivre
So to move
par rapport
on,
à la suite, mais en effet, cet ancrage, cette présence politique forte,
this
cette compréhension par
political
les élus du
will
pourquoi des
among
missions
our
et pourquoi elles
local
sont menées
politicians to
sont
understand the mission
majeurs.
and why we're doing it is
C'est
of utmost
fondateur et c'est
importance.
fondamental.
It really is fundamental for this
En
work.
poursuivant sur la présentation,
If we move on in the
bonjour,
presentation,
arrivé.
just one moment. If you hear me, could you just slow down very
Ah, pourtant, c'est
slightly?
hier.
Perhaps a little bit quick
D'accord,
for
je suis
the
désolée.
interpreting, so if you could just slow down ever so slightly.
En continuant sur la présentation,
And continuing with the presentation,
pour mener à bien ce travail, alors
to
je vous ai
conduct
évoqué tout
this
à l'heure
work, I
que la mission
mentioned earlier
d'inventaire,
the fact that the
d'inventaire
inventory,
général,
the general
elle avait en
inventory
fait commencé en
work,
1988
started in
jusqu'en
1988
2004.
and was conducted through to
Les enjeux par rapport à la
2004.
ville et par rapport aux
The
enseignements
issues for the town and for the
qu'avait
lessons
apporté
that could
cette
be
mission
learned
d'inventaire,
from this
ça a été de proposer aux élus de
was to
mettre en place au
propose
niveau de la
to
ville
the local
une direction du
politicians to set
patrimoine
up a heritage
anticipant les
department
décentralisations, ces
before
transferts
the
de compétences qui allaient
decentralisation
être
and the
donnés en
transfer of
effet au
powers
niveau
for
territorial par
heritage
rapport à des missions
to the
qui
local
étaient menées
authorities,
jusque-là par
which
l'État.
happened later from the
Donc en
state.
effet, le
So
socle fondamental, c'est
the
d'avoir une équipe,
foundation of this
de
is to
monter
have
une
the
direction du
right
patrimoine
team to put
avec des
together a
compétences et des
heritage
métiers.
department with the
Dans
professional
les
skills
métiers,
which are necessary.
et c'était ce qui avait permis, grâce au travail d'inventaire, on avait
And
travaillé
this
ensemble à la
is
constitution
thanks to the
d'une
work of the
direction d'un véritable
inventory,
service du
we put
patrimoine
together
sur la
a
ville.
department for
Et ça avait été
heritage
de se
in the
doter de
town
différentes compétences
and brought in
nécessaires
different skills that
à un
were
service de
needed
cet ordre-là.
for this sort of department.
Par rapport à ça, c'est vrai que ce serait
And
bien
on
que
this point,
la slide suivante arrive,
if we could move on to the next
même si en
slide.
effet il y a toujours un temps de retard. Voilà, merci.
Thank
C'était
you.
en fait de pouvoir avoir ce qu'on a
So the
appelé
idea
un
was
pôle
to
scientifique,
have a
avec en effet
scientific
les missions d'inventaire qui
department
étaient menées, les missions d'archéologie
conducting
du
the
bâti. Et
inventory, the
ce que la
archaeology
mission
work,
d'inventaire menée
and
sur la ville
what
depuis
the
88 avait montré,
inventory
surtout,
since
c'est ça
1988 had
l'importance,
shown
qui avait
us
été menée conjointement à une première opération
was that this
programmée,
had
ce qu'on
been
appelle
carried out
des
in
opérations
parallel
programmées
with a
d'amélioration de
first
l'habitat, qui
operation
sont
for
des
the improvement
dispositifs
of
d'aide
housing.
financière
This
forte
was a
apportés par
system
l'État
of financial
pour le
subsidies from the
réaménagement
state
de
for
bâtiments en vue de faire du logement.
for the conversion of buildings
La mission
to
d'inventaire avait
make decent
démarré
housing.
en même temps que ces
And the
missions
inventory
avaient
started at the
débouché sur
same
des gros
time as
chantiers,
this work on
qui avaient
housing,
permis
which
de
resulted
révéler,
in a lot
en
of
effet,
big
qu'il y avait la
projects,
présence d'un patrimoine
which
médiéval
showed
très
that
très
there was a
important sur la
lot
ville.
of
D'où le fait
significant
qu'un chargé d'inventaire
medieval
sur la ville
heritage.
devait
Hence,
avoir
the
impérativement des
inventory
compétences en
was
archéologie du bâtiment.
necessary, and our department needed
Parce
to
que
have
ce
the
n'était pas juste un
archaeological
recensement de
skills.
données,
It wasn't
il
just a
fallait aller
question of
plus loin
listing
dans une
data. We needed to go
investigation de
further
ce qui
in
était
our
révélé
investigation
lors des
into
sondages
the
et lors
things
des préparations
revealed
de chantier.
during the
Et c'était ça qui
surveys
était
and the
majeur
preparation for
pour un
the
patrimoine
renovation
tel
work.
celui que l'on
And
trouve à
this is of
Cahors,
great
c'est un
importance. In
patrimoine
the sort of
très masqué,
heritage like we have, which is
qu'il faut
often
aller
hidden,
chercher réellement dans son
you
épaisseur
really have
historique
to go digging
et qui demande
to
des compétences
find
spécifiques.
the features, and that requires specific
À côté de
skills.
ça, il faut pouvoir accompagner également
Alongside this,
tout
we
ce qui est le
also
portrait à
need to
connaissance du
guide
public et
all,
tout ce qui est cet accompagnement
provide
quotidien
the information
d'une
to the public on a
sensibilisation des
day-to-day
publics.
basis to raise
Alors,
awareness
qu'ils soient
in the
habitants,
general public,
soit habitants propriétaires bailleurs, qu'importe, mais cette sensibilité-là,
whether they're
comme
owners,
outil,
owner
il avait été
occupiers,
fait le
and
choix
the awareness
de
needs to
candidater
be
pour un label
developed.
en France qu'on appelle un label
And
Ville et pays d'art et d'histoire. qui est un
We also
outil
applied
de
for an
médiation, de
accreditation as
sensibilisation du
a
public.
town of art
Et
and
le fait
history
d'articuler
in France
un travail de connaissance
to
à
work
travers
on the
l'importance de
knowledge
l'inventaire,
of this
des
heritage, the
données qui sont
awareness of
collectées
the heritage,
et de l'importance de créer une
and for the
médiation
data
grand
collected,
public,
and
entre guillemets,
also to realize the
quotidienne,
importance of
passée par
mediation
l'outil
activities on a
label.
day-to-day
Voilà, on
basis. And
était sur
all
un
this
socle construit
is
de cette
fostered
matière.
by an
Si on va plus
accreditation
à fond
like
sur le
the
pôle
Towns of Art and
socle
History label.
médiation inventaire. Et l'inventaire sur la slide suivante.
And if we can
Alors,
move
dans
on
le
to
cadre de
the
la
next
médiation, il y
slide.
a également tous
So
les outils.
for mediation, there are all the
Exposition,
different tools that
publication,
exist,
que l'on verra par la suite.
exhibitions,
L'inventaire en
publications,
tant
as
que
we'll
tel.
see later. But for the inventory itself now,
Pendant la révision du règlement
during the
du secteur
review
sauvegardé,
of
avait
the
été menée aussi
protected
conjointement,
district
parce que c'est une enquête
rules,
qui permet
this was
d'établir
conducted
une
in
fiche
parallel
par
with a
bâtiment.
survey in
En
which we
parallèle,
prepared an
le chargé
information
d'inventaire
sheet per building.
de
At the
l'époque
same time, the inventory
suivait toutes les visites pour
managers
établir également une fiche
tracked
d'inventaire
all the visits
telle que
to
l'inventaire la
open
conçoit,
up inventory,
ce
to
qui
create
permettait
inventory
d'avoir
forms for all the
deux sources
buildings,
d'information
which provided two sources of
importantes,
information,
complémentaires,
which were
qui sont
complementary and important,
essentielles dans le cadre
and
des
which are
opérations
essential
de
for
restauration
the
qui suivent
restoration
après, qui suivent
operations
derrière.
which come
Donc, ce
afterwards.
socle de connaissances
So that
est
core
majeur
of
et
knowledge
essentiel pour
is
accompagner
essential
le projet,
to
son
guide the
évolution
renovation
et
projects
aider
and
un
how they are
architecte des
developed,
bâtiments de France,
and to help the
qui est
architects from the
l'agent de
Buildings
l'État
of France,
qui a la
which is the state
responsabilité
agency
de
which is
garantir
responsible
la bonne
for
application
ensuring the
du
proper
règlement dans ces
application
sites
of
protégés,
the regulations
de
in
lui
these
amener de
protected
l'élément de
sites,
compréhension
and
et qui
so to
permettent
provide
d'éclairer
these
un avis
architects
qui
with the
sera donné
information so that they can
sur
give an
un
informed
document de déclaration de travaux
opinion
ou de permis de construire.
to allow the work
Donc, d'où
to go
l'importance
ahead.
de collecte
Hence the
d'informations.
importance of collecting the information
Ça nourrit un
beforehand.
projet et
So
ça
it
permet
feeds
aussi
the
de faire
project
une couverture
and also
photographique,
enables us to
des
photograph
repérages de
the
dessins,
buildings,
remettre tout ça au
to
propre
take
et
drawings,
permettre de mieux comprendre comment un
plans,
bâtiment
and
évolue.
to understand
Sachant
how the
que
buildings have evolved.
dans le travail quotidien,
Bearing in
on
mind
a
in
très peu de
this
bâtiments
day-to-day
complets en
work,
fait.
we have
Il y a
very
énormément,
few
c'est un
full
puzzle quelque part.
buildings.
Il y a
It really
énormément
is a
d'éléments
jigsaw
parcellaires
puzzle. There are lots of
collectés
small
parce que des fois les
features
travaux ne vont concerner qu'un
here
rez-de-chaussée,
and there,
qu'un
and
étage,
often the work that's
qu'une
conducted is
partie d'un
just on one
étage.
floor, one part of a
Et c'est
building.
cette
And
collecte
so it's
d'informations
never a
qui
complete
va
building, but
permettre
all this
d'éclairer
information
mieux
has to be
l'ensemble du bâtiment
collected
lui-même
to
et les avis qui
give us
seront donnés derrière.
information on the buildings and to guide us in any decisions that
Si
have
l'on
to be made
continue
regarding their
sur les
restoration.
diapositives,
If we can move on to the next slide.
donc collecte d'informations, les fiches, ça ne
So
fait pas les plus
there's
vite hein, sur ça.
you can skip through that
Voilà, les
perhaps.
fiches avec comment on fait au
You
niveau
see
de
there the
l'étude
information
des
sheets
constats et comment ces constats,
with our
avec le
notes,
dessin, à l'appui des
which,
photos,
along with the drawings
permettent de
and
faire des relevés et de mieux comprendre.
photographs,
Et
enable
surtout
us
de
to conduct
pouvoir
surveys and
retranscrire sur
to
des
then
cartes, sur des plans,
transcribe onto maps
les différents éléments repérés
the
par
different
grande période
features
historique
which have been detected for
pour
the
mieux
different
comprendre,
historic
en effet,
periods,
comment les
to
bâtiments, comment
understand
il est important
how
de collecter
the
des informations,
buildings
comment il est important de
have
dresser de
evolved,
l'inventaire
and it's
et
important
comment
to
un
have that
bâtiment en
information from the
permanence a
inventory
évolué sur
and to
lui-même
see how the buildings have
et
evolved
qui
through the
après
years.
va éclairer les choix
And that
inévitables
then
qui
can
sont faits dans le cadre
inform
de
the
chantiers de restauration.
choices that will have to be made
Mais
when
c'est la
restoration
connaissance
work
qui
is to be
permet
carried
à un moment
out.
donné de
But
faire des
it's
choix.
this inventory, this knowledge, which
Si on ne
enables
connaît
us to
pas
make
bien un
those
bâtiment,
choices.
si on n'a
If we
pas bien
don't know
repéré
a
ses
building
différentes
well,
phases de construction
if
et
we
de son
aren't
évolution,
familiar with the different
alors on ne sera pas en
phases in
capacité de faire
its
des choix.
development and its
Parce que
evolution,
qui
we
dit
won't
faire
be
un
able to
choix
do that
dit
work,
qu'à un moment donné, on va abandonner une période pour une autre,
and we'll
bien
end up
évidemment,
neglecting
mais en
one period
fonction du
of time
degré
or another.
d'existence et d'importance des vestiges mis au jour. Ça aussi, c'est important dans le
And it
cadre du choix
also
qui sera fait. Mais
obviously
parce qu'on aura
will
repéré les
depend
éléments, alors on
on
sera en
the
capacité de le faire.
features that are revealed.
Je poursuis. On va passer à un moment
If we
donné à
can
des
move
exemples,
on
des
now
exemples
to some
concrets de
examples, some
chantiers qui sont en
practical
cours
examples of work sites which
et sur
are
lesquels
underway
on va mesurer toute l'importance
and
de l'implication,
we're going
puisque
to
dans le cadre de la
measure
thématique
the
d'aujourd'hui, il y avait aussi l'implication de la
importance
population
of
et
local
l'implication des particuliers.
involvement.
Un premier exemple,
The
c'était
first
un
example
bâtiment, alors vous
is
voyez sur la
here,
photographie de gauche,
is a
vous
building
voyez à
on
quel
the
point
left.
les enduits
You see how
banalisent un
the
bâtiment.
rendering has made
Alors
the
là,
building look very
au
ordinary.
demeurant, c'était
The
les
plaster.
enduits qui avaient été faits au début du XXe siècle
This had been done at the
et
beginning
qui
of the
ne
20th
donnaient
century
comme indication
and
sur l'épaisseur historique du bâtiment
didn't give any
que la
idea
forme de la porte
really of how the
d'entrée
building
avec
was.
l'ogive qui est informée, qui donnait une indication sur une potentielle réalité et un potentiel
It just
médiéval de cette maison
suggests
elle-même.
that this is perhaps a
Une fois les
medieval
enduits
building.
enlevés,
Once all
ça
that
permet à
rendering
l'archéologue de
had
pouvoir
been
faire son relevé
removed,
et de pouvoir repérer les
could
différentes
see
évolutions, les
the
traces.
different
À partir des traces, on
phases
peut travailler sur
in the
la
building,
possibilité de
and on
restituer.
that basis we could then
Et
work
alors,
on
cette maison
restoring
était
that.
une maison qui avait été
So
très
this
redécoupée à l'intérieur
building had
et qui
been
présentait
divided up
un logement
inside,
par percement. C'est-à-dire que vous aviez
and
un logement au rez-de-chaussée, puis un
there was
logement en
one
entresol,
accommodation unit
qui
on the
correspond aux
ground floor,
photos,
one
pardon, qui
on
correspond aux
the
photos qui sont ici. Donc, on avait un
next
logement qui était
floor.
ici,
So one
faiblement
housing
éclairé.
unit
La rue
here.
ne fait qu'un mètre 80 de
The
large.
street is just 1,80 m wide,
Un
so there's not a
logement
lot of
placé
light
ici dans
down
un
at the bottom.
entresol excessivement bas, puis un logement
One
ici, même là, il y en avait
accommodation
deux,
unit in the
deux sur le
mezzanine
niveau.
level,
Donc, la parcelle,
two on the
elle fait à peu
next
près 35
floor
mètres
up,
carrés au sol. Donc,
and this
c'était
is
un
only
tout petit logement.
a plot of land of
Puis
35
au-dessus, la
square
même
meters,
chose.
and above
Et
the
avec,
same
à chaque
thing,
fois, en fait,
and
une
each
seule
time
orientation sur la rue.
with everything opening onto
Donc,
the street.
des logements très inconfortables
So
et
very
avec, bien
uncomfortable,
évidemment,
small
énormément d'insalubrité
accommodation units which
et de
were not
l'indécence
really
en
fit
type de logement.
for living in.
À partir, le travail consiste d'abord à
So
accompagner
the
le
work
propriétaire en lui
then
demandant
consists in
de
guiding
faire
the
dans un
owner.
premier temps le décroutage des façades. C'est-à-dire qu'on enlève les enduits. À
So we
partir de
began
l'enlèvement des
by
enduits, on comprend
removing the
un
rendering
peu
on
mieux
the
comment va
facade
fonctionner le
to
bâtiment.
get a better
Et
idea
là,
of how to
l'objectif,
proceed.
c'est de
And
retravailler
there, the
avec lui sur
objective is to
l'usage
work with
intérieur.
the owner on the use
Et là,
of the
nous avons
interior.
débouché sur une opération qui a
And
ramené
this
cette
came
maison à
up
son
with
état de
an
maison, et
operation
non pas
to make
d'immeuble,
this house a
c'est-à-dire avec
house
un seul
again.
logement.
So just
Et donc
one
des grandes
single
pièces.
home with large
Avec,
rooms
on a retrouvé donc des pièces de commodité à cet endroit-là, des pièces de stockage en rez-de-chaussée,
with
qui
different
sont
storage
impropres
rooms on
de
the
l'habitat.
ground
Une
floor,
grande salle ici, avec
a
la
large
restitution
room
des deux
here
fenêtres médiévales que vous
with
pouvez voir sur
two
la photo
medieval
de droite,
windows you can
qui
see
permet
here.
de voir les grandes fenêtres restituées,
So large
géminées avec donc la fenêtre,
windows
la colonne, le chapiteau au milieu, qui là
with
sont des
their
restitutions. Et
columns.
retrouvé au dernier niveau, on a retrouvé
And
un port de
on the
bois
upper floor,
dans son état,
with the
alors
wood
au départ
frame,
médiéval, mais bien retravaillé à
initially
la fin du Moyen-Âge,
medieval, but which
mais
had been
néanmoins de retrouver
much
là deux grandes
changed at the
chambres
end of the
avec
Middle
des salles
Ages,
d'eau,
and here with
qui du
two
coup ont ramené
bedrooms
beaucoup de
and a
lumière dans
shower
l'espace,
room with a lot more
beaucoup
light,
d'espace, d'habitabilité,
a lot more
et qui
space,
ont
a
restitué
single home
sur la
now,
maison
and
son état
which has
valorisable, qui était le
brought the
Moyen-Âge,
house
clairement,
back
et qui a
closer to its
permis
state in the Middle
surtout de
Ages,
ramener aussi de
and which
l'attractivité
has
sur l'espace
also
public. Et
made
ça, c'est
this a
très
much more
important. Et
attractive
là, on avait un
house in terms
propriétaire
seen from the
qui
street,
est
from the public
enseignant
space.
et qui s'est très
Here,
vite
the
piqué au
owner
jeu.
was a teacher
Piqué
who
au jeu
really
de la
got caught
restitution.
up in the whole
Le
process
travail
of
de dessin est majeur, parce que
reconstituting
ça permet aussi pour des
the
gens qui ne
home.
voient pas, parce que c'est pas si évident que ça d'arriver à
And it's
repérer les
important to
éléments,
have drawings, to
de
have
mieux comprendre vers quoi on
to
va pouvoir amener
understand
son
the
bâtiment.
building, to see what
Il y a
can be
énormément
done with
d'argent
it.
public,
A lot
évidemment,
of
qui accompagne ces
public
opérations-là, avec
money is also
le gros
obviously
partenariat de la
provided for
région,
this sort
qui
of
vient sur des
work
éléments comme ça
from
pour
the
permettre des
region
restitutions, pour
to
permettre de gagner de la qualité d'habitation par la connaissance
make
et de la
for
qualité de
better
l'espace public,
quality housing
et
through
de
the
mieux accompagner
knowledge
la
of the buildings
redécouverte
and
de
to
la ville
provide
dans
better
son enveloppe
support to
médiévale
guide a
majeure.
rediscovery
Autre
of the
exemple
town in its medieval
qui
form.
a été apporté par
Another
rapport à l'intérêt et l'implication des
project
propriétaires,
showing
ça
the
a été la redécouverte
interest
d'une
for
porte
the owners was
et d'une porte avec une chapelle au-dessus,
a
dans son
discovery
état médiéval.
here of a
Donc
medieval
vous pouvez avoir une
doorway,
restitution sur la partie basse
which you
de
see,
l'image. Et où là, alors entièrement reconfiguré au fil du temps, hein, très
which had been
rapidement, et même au
totally
Moyen-Âge,
modified through
même
the
13e,
years, even
14e, on a
in
déjà plus
the
une
Middle
porte,
Ages.
ça devient a priori un logement. Mais voilà, et là,
The
ça a
building had
été
been converted from the
les
14th
choix
century onwards, and
ont
there
porté sur,
you see the
on
choices
restitue là, on retrouve la porte,
made,
donc on passe de cet état-là,
revealing
première photo à gauche,
the doorway. We
un
started out
dessin
as
des
it is
éléments
on the
repérés
left, then we did
à la photo de
drawings of
droite,
what was found,
on retrouve la porte, on en retrouve
and
son
here
épaisseur
we've restored
dans
the
l'usage
door
qui est fait du rez-de-chaussée.
and the
Et puis
original
après, en
use of the
étage,
ground floor.
l'époque qui va être mise en valeur, c'est l'état 17e, avec le dernier niveau,
And on the upper
où l'on va
floors,
restituer
we
la
have
fenêtre
the
du milieu
building as it was
qui
in
avait
the
été murée
17th century,
et qui
with a
ramène
window
beaucoup plus de
opened up
lumière dans
here,
l'habitat,
which brings in
indéniablement.
a lot
Et
more
là, en
light.
rez-de-chaussée, une activité
And
économique
on the ground
beaucoup plus
floor,
cohérente, beaucoup plus valorisée
it's much more
grâce à la
consistent with a
réouverture.
business activity
Alors, c'est toujours le même
by
type de commerce,
opening
hein,
up
c'est
the
un
building.
coiffeur qui est
It's still
réinstallé là.
a hairdresser's,
Et on
which
a
is
travaillé
here
avec le
as it was
propriétaire pour
before,
qu'en fait, il
but we
supprime
worked
le
with the
logement qui
owner
était
to
ici,
get rid of the
où la
housing
personne, où
unit which was
les
just
étudiants, parce que
above.
très souvent, vous savez, le logement
You know,
étudiant est
often these
l'étudiant
small
est une cible intéressante
accommodation units
pour
are
des
often
logements
for
totalement
rented out
improbables.
to
Et
students.
là, en fait, il ne pouvait rester debout qu'au
And
milieu.
here,
Il ne pouvait
it
pas
was a
être debout
student's
entièrement,
apartment, but the
entièrement
student
debout
could
dans la chambre
only
d'où tu es.
stand up in the
C'est
middle of the
improbable hein, comme
apartment. The
situation.
ceilings were too
Donc
low.
ça nous
It
a
really
permis,
wasn't reasonable.
par la connaissance,
But through
par la
this knowledge
sensibilisation du
of the building
propriétaire,
and by raising the
qui a
awareness of
totalement
the
compris
owner,
en fait vers quoi on
who
devait l'amener.
really
Et
understood
c'est vraiment la connaissance qui est au
what
cœur
could be done here,
des
it
évolutions par
shows
rapport à un
just how
propriétaire à qui on
important
faisait
that
perdre un loyer,
knowledge is.
quelque part. Hein.
The
Il y a
owner
ça
was
aussi en
losing
fait.
one rent
Mais
payment because
voilà,
there was one
et puis
less
l'apport par
accommodation
rapport à l'intérêt
unit,
général a
and
été
then
aussi
in
très
terms
présent
of
et
the
a
general
pris une
interest of
certaine
the building,
fonctionnalité.
it's
Autre
much
exemple,
better.
par rapport aux
Another
implications
example
des propriétaires
now showing
et aux implications des
the
collectivités par rapport à
involvement
ça,
of the
ça a
owners
été
and
ce
the
grand
local
bâtiment
authority. You have this
qui a
large
été riche
building,
d'informations
which was very rich
et
in
riche aussi, là
information,
aussi, c'est lié à l'opération et à l'opérationnel. On ne peut
and
pas
this shows the
intervenir sur du
operational
patrimoine
side.
en
Here,
urbain
this is urban
sans intervenir
heritage,
sur son
and
usage.
we can only work on this
Ce sont
by
des
working on
des
its
immeubles
use.
d'habitation. Imparablement,
This
on va
was
intervenir
a
sur les modes
building
d'habiter.
with dwellings, and
Inévitablement.
we had to change the way
Tout est
people
croisé,
lived in
en
it.
fait. Hein.
Everything
C'est une
links
imbrication
together.
d'intérêts. Ce bâtiment, totalement insalubre,
So
vous avez
this
les photos qui sont là,
building was totally unfit
avec des états
for living in,
successifs d'occupation. En fait, dans le cadre du règlement du
and
site
with the
protégé,
regulations on the
là, on
protected
avait à peu
site.
près 12 logements.
Here, I think
Dans
there
des
were
états
12
d'insalubrité
accommodation
extrêmes,
units which were extremely
avec
unfit
des formes de
for
squat,
living in, a
d'occupation, mais
sort
qui
of
étaient
squat,
alors des occupations illégales ailleurs, d'où la terminologie de
almost
squat, mais qui en fait là
illegal
étaient totalement
occupation,
organisées par le propriétaire lui-même,
but in fact organized here by
avec
the
une
owner of the
dangerosité
building. It was
extrême, des
dangerous,
éléments de
very
pourrissement des structures
dangerous. The
excessivement
structure was
avancés et
beginning to
irrémédiables.
rot and
Là, il y a
really
eu un
could
très
not
gros
be
travail.
sorted out. So here, a
Alors, il y avait
lot
déjà
of work had to be
archéologiquement
done.
des éléments qui apparaissaient,
First of all,
comme
there
cette
were a
arcade,
number
tu
of
peux aller au
features
diapo
which were
suivant,
visible. You can see
comme les
the
fenêtres
outline of the
Renaissance qui étaient ici,
arches,
qui laissaient
the
supposer,
Renaissance
donc ça
windows,
c'est
which
la fiche à l'immeuble,
suggested
hein, un
here
immeuble qui
we
avait été
have the
repéré,
information data
à
sheet
protéger,
on the
continue,
building, which had been
et
listed
avec des
as requiring
restitutions qui étaient
protection,
demandées, l'arcade et le
and
fait de restituer aussi
drawings to see
au
what
niveau
was
du
hidden
premier étage
behind
sur la
this,
rue,
and also to
ces
see the
éléments de fenêtres
Renaissance
Renaissance
windows
dont on
on
avait
the first
des
floor,
traces
of
sur les
which
fenêtres
we
fermées au
could just
19e, on
see
avait des
the
traces qui apparaissaient.
traces with
Et puis
some
surtout, il y en avait
windows
une
which
qui était
had been
dans
walled
un
up in the
placard,
19th
qui
century
elle était
and were
totalement en
hidden
place.
in a
Donc là,
cupboard.
le travail va
So the
consister
work
au fur
here
et à mesure des
consisted
démontages.
little
Et là,
by
par rapport au
little in
propriétaire,
dismantling all of
on
this,
avait
and
la
here with
chance
the owner,
que
we
la
were
personne qui
lucky
rachète ce
enough that the
bâtiment-là,
person who bought
on
this
l'avait eu en
building
stage. Elle avait suivi des
had
cours d'histoire de
done
l'art,
some training
elle
with
avait
us.
suivi un master patrimoine,
The owner
et on
had
l'avait
done a
eu en stage
master's in
10 ans
heritage. We'd
auparavant,
had her as an
au niveau du
intern
service.
10 years
Donc déjà, il y
before
avait une
in our
sensibilisation quand
department.
même.
So
Mais
it was a
malgré tout,
person who
elle
was
était
aware of
devenue
the importance
investisseur
of heritage,
en
but
immobilier
she had
et elle
become
avait
an
aussi
investor in property,
l'intérêt de l'investisseur
and
qui
she
investit
wanted
et
also
qui ne
obviously
veut
to
bien
have a
évidemment
profitable
pas perdre trop de
investment
logements quand même dans une opération.
and didn't
Et
want
là,
to
on
lose
passait
any
d'un nombre de
accommodation
logements,
units.
en fait, de
And here
8
we were going to
initialement,
go from
12 en
8,
usage, on passait à 3.
we were going to end up with
Et en
just
lui
3
demandant de
accommodation
démolir en
units at
cœur
the
d'hiver
end, and we were
pour
asking her
remettre en valeur
to
son bien
demolish the
et
central
redonner
part
de
of the
la
building
qualité à l'ensemble.
to give greater quality
Ça
to
a été
the
un peu
whole.
compliqué au départ,
It was a
mais
bit
au final,
complicated in
comme
the
elle
beginning,
aussi
but
participe
ultimately,
au
as she
chantier lui-même, hein,
also was
parce
taking part
qu'elle met
in
la
the
main à la
work,
pâte, entre guillemets, dans le cadre des travaux et des démontages, ça a permis en fait de révéler
it made it possible to
un bâtiment
reveal
médiéval en place
a medieval building
et de mieux comprendre comment,
and to better
dans les photos suivantes,
understand,
on avait
if we
pu
can move on to
avoir
the next
une
photographs,
salle voûtée
how there had been
dans la
the
partie du
vaulted
bâtiment arrière, puisque c'est un
room
bâtiment
at
en
the
2
rear of the
corps de
building.
logis. Un corps de
In
bâtiment
fact, there
sur rue,
were 2
une
buildings.
cour
There was one
intérieure,
building
un
on the
corps de
street,
bâtiment arrière.
an inner
Et en fait, ça a
courtyard, and
permis de
then
révéler
another building behind it.
l'état
And this,
médiéval
in fact,
avec en fait un
revealed
seul bâtiment,
that in
le
medieval times
bâtiment
there had
arrière étant
been
un comblement
just
d'un vide.
one
Mais
building,
tout ça a permis de la faire
and this
progresser
all
dans
made
le
it
projet de
possible
réaménagement de son logement, des
to
logements eux-mêmes,
guide the
et de
renovation
révéler pour la
project
connaissance des étapes
and
très
to
intéressants
reveal some
qui
very
nous ont
interesting
permis
things on the
de
building,
faire, grâce à
which
ce bâtiment,
enabled us,
beaucoup
thanks
de
to this
communication auprès du
building, to do
public,
a lot of communication work
à
with the
travers des journées du
public
patrimoine,
through
à
the
travers des journées
heritage
thématiques,
days and
mais qui ont
themed days
permis,
that we
à partir de
organized.
ce bâtiment,
And on the
à
basis
partir
of
de
this
l'intérêt
building
de
and
mieux
the
le comprendre,
interest
d'en réaliser l'inventaire, ça nous a permis de
from of the
sortir des
information from the
opérations par
inventory,
ailleurs. Et
this
ça a
also
permis à des
enabled us to
propriétaires de
trigger
prendre
other projects
conscience
and for owners to become aware
que eux aussi
that they
avaient des
too
bâtiments
had buildings things.
qui n'avaient pas d'attrait particulier, ils n'en voyaient pas vraiment l'intérêt, mais qui en fait, en voyant de quoi on partait, vers quoi on arrivait, que là, ils devaient eux aussi avoir un bâtiment d'intérêt majeur. Ça, c'est très important au quotidien, parce que ça permet, pour les opérations suivantes, qu'ils attendent qu'on fasse de l'inventaire, qu'ils attendent qu'on investigue leurs bâtiments, qu'on les sonde, qu'on sonde les bâtiments pour mieux les comprendre et pour les accompagner pour les projets. On continue sur les exemples suivants. Donc là, grosse participation du propriétaire. Donc on va continuer les photos. Donc à chaque démontage, on a un élément de connaissance complémentaire qui va permettre d'avancer sur l'évolution même du projet, puisque grâce à l'inventaire, on s'est rendu compte que de l'état de la maison médiévale, on avait l'état de gauche qui permettait là aussi d'avoir ces fenêtres doubles, géminées, puisqu'on avait en place des éléments identifiés, des parties basses, des différents claveaux, des baies et des baies de la maison romane qui étaient en place. Puis, grâce à ces éléments-là, on a pu regarder que l'état du 15e, une fois que c'est réaménagé à la fin du 15e, début du 16e siècle, qu'en fait, ils étaient venus juste insérer le linteau. Ils avaient en fait enlevé colonnes et chapiteaux et arcades sur la fenêtre du Moyen-Âge pour basculer et mettre en place la fenêtre du Renaissance avec sa croix, sa croisée et juste son linteau, qui nous permettait à nous de pouvoir décrypter les différents états qu'avait subi la maison et ses différentes modifications au fil des siècles. On continue sur les images d'après. Donc voilà un état restitué. Donc le bâtiment est toujours en chantier à l'heure actuelle. Ça fait déjà pratiquement 3 ans que c'est en chantier. Et en fait, avec ici à l'étage un très grand logement qui sera mis en place. Autre exemple, alors lui, il a été un exemple très, très révélateur du travail qui peut être fait avec les propriétaires et de l'évolution de l'approche d'un propriétaire en fonction justement de cette importance de la connaissance. On se retrouve face à un bâtiment, là aussi 12 logements. Alors, en façade réaménagée dans les années 30, première moitié du XXe siècle, tout très réenduit, l'ensemble des baies dépercements réalisés par la suite, voilà, des modifications, des balcons, des petits appuis, des éléments de modénature, de décor très des années 30, très art décoratif des 30. Et puis surtout, un drame à l'intérieur, c'est que deuxième partie du XXe siècle, ils avaient tout crépi, dont tout était recouvert de ciment, un ciment dur, très agressif pour nos bâtiments qui sont, pour le Moyen-Âge, très souvent des bâtiments de briques, et des briques qui sont faiblement cuites, donc qui s'altèrent vite, enfin, c'est relatif, mais qui peuvent s'altérer. Et donc un bâtiment très, très bousculé. Donc partant de là, quand les propriétaires achètent ça, ils veulent dans un premier temps réhabiliter les appartements existants. Là, toujours pareil, même pratique. Pour le bien de la connaissance, on leur dit qu'il serait bien de commencer par piquer les façades. On va passer aux photos suivantes. Donc, piquage des façades côté rue. Et là, et côté rue et côté intérieur aussi. Donc on demande de piquer. Donc, on va commencer par l'intérieur. Et là, en fait, dans cet espace à gauche, la photo de gauche, vous voyez, voilà, la photo qui est là, vous voyez qu'il y avait un cabanon qui était venu remplir le vide, il y avait une espèce de jardin, puis on avait créé les appartements, démontage des éléments parasites, puis au démontage, on réalise et on découvre qu'en fait, on avait un état 13e siècle en place, avec surtout une fenêtre en rez-de-chaussée, avec une porte, et puis un autre élément de porte dans un étage avant qu'on ne vive. Donc, élément, voilà, on va dégager le chapiteau va être dégagé et va être pleinement dans ces chapiteaux du XIIIe siècle, qui sont des chapiteaux feuillagés qui sont sur carreaux avec des motifs végétaux. Le piquage va se poursuivre sur la tour d'escalier qui est ici. Il va rapidement s'arrêter parce qu'en fait, il y a une trop grande altération des matériaux. Donc, on va être obligé d'arrêter, de faire piquer l'enduit. Et puis, sur le latéral, donc le latéral, c'est la façade perpendiculaire à la façade principale que vous avez ici sur la photo en haut à droite. En fait, en la piquant, on se rend compte. Donc là, vous aviez 3 logements. En fait, un petit logement d'entresol avec la petite fenêtre qui est en haut à gauche, et un autre logement qui était en bas, et un autre logement ici, totalement improbable. Et en piquant, en fait, on se réalise qu'on a un bâtiment 13e siècle totalement en place, totalement là, avec des percées successives, mais néanmoins, il est en place. Les photos suivantes permettent de voir comment on progresse grâce au piquage, grâce à la connaissance sur la façade sur rue. Façade sur rue, c'est donc la façade rose qui était tout à l'heure avec un balcon, donc on voit toujours la photo après piquage sur la gauche, permet de révéler un bâtiment médiéval dont on avait vu le côté latéral, hein, dans la cour, permet de repérer qu'on a un jour qu'on appelle oculus en partie haute qui venait apporter une lumière complémentaire pour deux fenêtres que l'on va pouvoir voir à la place de la porte-fenêtre. Ici, en fait, apparaissent les traces de deux fenêtres, dont un chapiteau est en place avec sa colonne, qui avait été bouché, et des deux fenêtres là aussi médiévales avec la colonne au milieu, qui va permettre un chapiteau dans un remplissage, qui va permettre de restituer les baies que l'on peut voir sur la photo en haut à droite, dont les propriétaires, qui au départ ne voulaient que refaire les peintures et l'électricité et le sanitaire. Après le piquage, ils ont découvert un bâtiment tel qu'ils ne pouvaient pas en fait l'avoir imaginé et ni même soupçonné. Et ce travail de connaissance, ça fait maintenant 2 ans qu'on travaille avec eux. Petit à petit, ils ont totalement modifié le nombre d'appartements, déjà, les usages, et surtout, c'est qu'ils se sont mis eux-mêmes à restaurer le bâtiment, à rentrer dans cette démarche. Ils ont, par exemple, pour les fenêtres, là, à l'heure actuelle, on a des fenêtres qui prennent la totalité de la baie, qui sont en fer, hein, qui sont en acier. C'est eux-mêmes qui ont assuré les soudures pour créer les fenêtres parce qu'ils n'ont pas trouvé d'artisans pour leur faire. Donc voilà, il y a tout ce travail-là, mais qui est vraiment dû à cette progression de ce travail de connaissance, de leur amener des exemples ailleurs, de leur montrer d'autres bâtiments pour qu'ils voient sur ça les données et pour travailler sur ça. On continue, on finit parce que je pense qu'on doit arriver sur les dernières. Voilà, donc toujours pareil, le travail de repérage, comment à un moment donné le bâtiment a évolué, quelles sont les traces et quelles sont les traces d'éléments qui sont restituables. Donc ici, les fameuses deux fenêtres dont on a des traces qui permettaient de restituer les deux fenêtres cheminée. Et sur les fenêtres de la partie remontée au XVIIe siècle, puisque toute la partie de la photo du milieu, là, c'est un bâtiment remonté au XVIIe siècle, où là, les enjeux étaient, on voit sur la photo de gauche, retrouver de grandes baies, parce que bien souvent, elles avaient été resserrées, revenir à un état XVIIe, rendre des croisillons en pierre qui restituent un état XVIIe avec les fenêtres derrière, et qui du coup, là aussi, amène beaucoup plus de lumière dans les appartements. Chaque fois, c'est la même chose. On inventorie les éléments repérés, on crée des ça permet d'accompagner les restaurations nécessaires. Financièrement, on l'accompagne par du financement public, bien sûr, fort, parce qu'il y a un enjeu majeur, révélé par ce travail de connaissance, et qui apporte de la qualité d'habiter pour les appartements qui sont derrière. Pour tout ça, il faut des supports de communication qui sont forts. Donc, ce sont des séries de plaquettes, des expositions, des dossiers aussi qui sont remis au propriétaire lui-même pour comprendre mieux son bâtiment. On l'accompagne la façon personnalisée. Et puis, des thématiques développées à travers ces plaquettes grand public, sur lesquelles là aussi on a l'accompagnement de la région par rapport à ça. Des conférences, des expositions, et puis surtout ce travail d'accompagnement au quotidien auprès des propriétaires, au quotidien, chaque fois, parce qu'on accompagne tous les travaux en fait en centre historique, en articulation avec l'architecte des bâtiments. Voilà. Je ne sais pas du tout si j'ai tenu le temps.
I don't know if I stuck to time at all or whether I've gone way over. Thank you, La. I wanted to check first of all whether you could hear me. Okay, yes, I can hear you now.
Désolé.
It was a little longer than expected, but it was very interesting to see the overall project for the town, and then the practical, very concrete examples of buildings which have been restored in a magnificent way, and to see for different uses. And I think it shows two things. It shows, first of all, the importance of that knowledge for these projects. That was clear in the examples you showed.
auprès de nos partenaires internationaux, auprès
also something that is a challenge for our international partners, and the fact that heritage can still allow place for contemporary living and can even be an asset when it comes for the building. I'll hand over immediately now if there are any questions. There's a question from José. I'll hand over to you. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Thank you very much, Laure Courget. That was fantastic. First of all, I wanted to congratulate you on the work you're doing in Cahors. I see that because I was born in that district, in the historic district, next to the Rue du Chapeau du Roi, and lived there and worked there until 1988. I left after that. But I've been back in recent years, and compared to what I knew back in the day, it really is extraordinary, the difference and how a town and a district can change when you put the resources into it and you do the work that you have done. I won't go on longer. I really listened to you with great emotion, seeing all that. When you talked about the fact these buildings were unfit for living, I can confirm that that was often the case. They were not decent housing, and but at that time, for the people who lived in the district, there was a big immigrant population, including my parents, who were Spanish immigrants, lots of Portuguese people, North Africans who had come to live in that unfit housing. So the questions I have for you, there are three questions. The first, as you mentioned, is that even if I know some of the answers, it was perhaps more for the colleagues. Over the long term, how have you convinced the successive municipal authorities and mayors to work with you and to keep going in this effort? The second question is, a few years ago, I heard of what you were doing in Cahors, and I heard it said that in the restoration work that was being done in the district, some of it was to be converted into social housing, affordable housing. Is that something you did, and to what extent? And the final question, further to different discussions I've had with different towns in France and Hungary, concerns energy efficiency in old buildings. And having lived in this sort of building with all the problems of cold that there were in winter, what have you been able to do in terms of energy efficiency in your rehabilitation work? Sorry, I went on a little bit long, but it's something I feel very strongly about. I'll give the answers. So regarding the question of how we get our successive mayors and municipal authorities to work with us, we've had 3 different mayors over the years I've been working here.
Je dois saluer les services de l'État qui m'ont quand même beaucoup accompagné pour pouvoir déjà structurer un service de patrimoine. Déjà. Service de l'État, ministère de la Culture, terriblement, et à travers les conventions culturelles, indéniablement. Et après, déjà que vous avez l'aide des services de l'État, c'est important. Et puis par ailleurs, je crois que quand vous avez une conviction, que vous portez un engagement particulier, je pense qu'au bout d'un moment, vous arrivez à le faire passer. Et puis, il y a eu un autre acteur qui a été majeur et essentiel et qui est arrivé, en fait, quelque part par la suite, d'une certaine manière. Ça a été l'association Cités remarquables, indéniablement. Parce que, alors, pas au premier élu, évidemment, parce qu'ils n'existaient pas à ce moment-là. J'arrive à la collectivité en 1998. Mais ça va être après, et en effet, le fait de pouvoir permettre et mettre en place ce dialogue entre des élus et des techniciens, et d'instaurer ce travail conjoint a été majeur, et puis surtout, ils ont beaucoup apporté ce point de vue-là, parce que quand on a changé à niveau d'équipe municipale, le premier élément, c'est qu'on a commencé à s'intégrer dans la notion de label du Galerie d'Histoire, ces éléments-là. Et quand le troisième maire est arrivé, le premier réflexe que j'ai eu quand j'ai vu ce qu'ils avaient apporté au précédent, je me suis dit, il faut absolument qu'on aille aux rencontres, et ça tombe bien, c'était Grenoble sur les efficacités énergétiques en 2008. Et là, je me suis dit, il faut absolument que j'ai un élu qui aille les voir, parce que vous savez, souvent, le travers des élus, mais parce que c'est une posture qu'ils ont tous, hein. Ils ne veulent pas faire ce que le précédent a fait dans un premier temps. C'est systématiquement, c'est une espèce de...
Systematically, they want it to be different to what the
ils sont tous
previous
pareils, hein.
municipal team
Et
did. They're all the same, these
je me suis
politicians.
dit, ah non,
And
ils
so
ne
I said to
peuvent
myself,
pas casser l'élan
they
qui est donné.
can't stop
Et donc, il faut
what we have
absolument
been doing.
que je
And
l'amène
so
à une rencontre
I
d'association.
took them to a
Parce
meeting
que
of the
là,
association
je sais
because
qu'eux, ils
there
vont
I
apporter le
knew
soutien
that
nécessaire.
they
Et que
would
souvent,
get the
vous écoutez
support
mieux
they
des gens qui sont à
needed.
l'extérieur,
And often you listen
plus facilement.
better to people
Donc
from
voilà,
outside.
pour répondre à la première question.
So that's the
Et
first
après, en
question.
effet, voilà, ils sont
After
rentrés dans le
that,
système et au-delà de
they
toute
became a
espérance,
part of
d'ailleurs.
the system and things have
Et là, je
gone
suis
even
avec une
better than
équipe qui est là
expected.
depuis qui attaque
And
son
now
deuxième mandat.
that
Troisième mandat.
municipal team is
Troisième
now
mandat.
starting its third term of
Concernant
office.
les logements sociaux,
Regarding the social
concernant les
housing,
logements sociaux, il y a eu évidemment
there
énormément de
obviously
logements
has
sociaux,
been
parce
a
que
lot
c'était la
of
grande démarche thématique dans les années
social
80,
housing, which
qui ont
was
été
developed in the
réalisés à
1980s
partir des premières opérations accompagnées par l'État, les fameuses opérations
with
programmées
support
d'amélioration de
from
l'habitat
the
dès les années
state to
88,
improve housing from the end of the
correspondant à l'approbation
1980s.
du règlement du secteur sauvegardé. En fait, quand il est approuvé,
When
l'État a
the
mené
plan
des outils.
was
Et les
prepared
opérations
for
programmées
the protected
faisaient partie de ces
districts,
outils-là.
one of the requirements was this to
Par
have
ces
social
outils, on a eu
housing.
beaucoup de logements. Alors,
And
par ces outils,
so
oui, il y a eu beaucoup
through
de
the
logements
different
sociaux.
systems,
D'ailleurs,
state
toutes
systems
les
exist
opérations
because a
sortaient
lot
avec du
of
logement
social
social,
housing.
où à cette époque-là, les
So back
financements
in those
publics pouvaient
days,
atteindre
there was public
90,
financing, which would be very
95% des
generous
financements
for
publics.
90 or
C'était énorme.
95% of the amount
Mais en
could
fait,
come from the state.
quand ça se met en place,
But
le travail de
when
connaissance
you
n'y est
do
pas.
this,
C'est-à-dire, puisqu'il
when
va
you do that
démarrer
sort
là,
of
puisque la
work,
mission
it's
d'inventaire,
not
la première
based
menée
on
par
the
l'État, va
knowledge
démarrer en
because
88 en
that
même
was
temps.
in fact before the
Grâce à ces
inventory had
grosses
really got
opérations,
started.
ça a
But with
permis de
these
révéler
big
des éléments qui ont
operations,
servi
it
l'inventaire
revealed
et
a
qui
lot
nous ont
of
servi
features which
a
were then
posteriori
presented
largement,
in the
mais
inventory,
qui
which
n'ont
were useful
pas servi la
later.
qualité d'habiter et qui
But
n'ont
at
pas
that
servi la
time, they weren't
destination.
really focused on the quality of the
Maintenant,
housing.
on est
Now,
pratiquement 30 ans plus tard,
30 years later,
avec toutes les
we
conséquences,
have a
et déjà
system, we
depuis un
now have
moment,
all the
de ce qu'a
consequences
été les
of
conséquences de ce logement social
that social
à
housing
outrance dans ces centres historiques.
in excess,
Et souvent, en
in the
définitive, dans
historic
des conditions
center,
d'habitabilité
and
qui
often
étaient
living
pour une
conditions
notion de 88, mais qui n'y étaient plus 30 ans
which
plus tard.
might have been okay in the 1990s,
Et
1980s,
là,
but are
comme
not
dans tous
okay
les centres
today.
historiques,
So
le
throughout
problème est
the
le même.
historic
Il
center, the
faut
problem
retrouver
is the same. We
une
need
diversité de population.
to get back to a good
Parce qu'en fait,
population
le fait
mix.
d'avoir tellement intensifié
Because
le logement
when
social,
you
mais
have
c'est le cas à Cahors, mais c'est le cas
only
partout,
social
en
housing,
fait,
as happened in
en
Cahors,
France,
and happened in other places in
a en
France
fait
as well,
spécialisé quelque part les
it
habitants. Et
specializes
ça, c'est pas bon.
the
Vous ne pouvez pas
population,
avoir
and
ou
that's
des
not
gens très
good.
nantis,
You
ou des gens
shouldn't have
pas du tout
districts
nantis,
with
ou des gens... C'est pas
just
possible.
wealthy
Une
people
société,
or
elle est
just
plurielle.
poor
Elle est
people.
faite par tout le
Society
monde.
is
Et
mixed,
c'est
and
cette
everyone has their place in
pluralité
society,
mince, voilà,
and you need
ce
to have
côté
that
très
mix,
divers
the
qu'il
different
faut retrouver dans le
aspects, and
logement.
that's what you
Et c'est
have
sur
to
quoi
achieve
on
in
s'attelle
your
au quotidien,
housing,
bien
and
sûr,
that's what
par
we
rapport à
work
ça.
on day in,
Par
day
rapport à
out.
l'efficacité énergétique,
Regarding energy efficiency,
on a mené une opération qui était
we
un
did
programme européen,
an operation through a
le
European
Sud-Ouest,
program
qui étaient les programmes
for the
européens qui étaient liés
southwest
aux
of
pays qui étaient
Europe.
du sud de l'Europe. Hein.
So a
Donc là, on a
program
monté un
for the south of Europe,
programme
and we put together
avec
a
un pays
European
une
project
ville du Portugal, Porto,
with a
et une
town in
ville
Portugal,
d'Espagne, de
Porto,
Galice, Vitoria-Gasteiz,
and
sur la
Vitoria-Gasteiz
thématique
in
d'intervention,
Spain
d'amélioration énergétique sur
on
bâti ancien, qui
improving
était déjà
energy
un sujet sur
efficiency in
lequel
old
travaillait
buildings.
un premier adjoint, Michel Simon,
We
qui
had
était
a
dans la
deputy
précédente équipe
mayor at
municipale,
that time in the
qui s'est beaucoup
previous
investi sur ce
municipal team
thème-là, sur cette
who had done a
thématique-là,
lot of work on
et
energy
qui nous a embarqués, du point de vue, nous, techniciens, dans ce
and
programme européen.
who
On travaille sur le sujet,
organised
on
this
continue
European
à travailler
project
sur le
with us.
sujet.
We're
On travaille
continuing
d'ailleurs
to
en
work on that
partenariat avec
project
Cités,
on that
qui nous
subject
avait
now.
accompagnés sur ce programme européen
We've been
Sud-Ouest,
working on the
qui faisait
subject of
partie de nos
energy efficiency
partenaires
with
techniques,
Cités
qui avait
as well,
été,
who were also
qui avait
partners in the
accompagné la ville de
project.
Cahors. Ils nous ont accompagnés sur la sortie d'une
They
plaquette,
have
d'ailleurs, de
provided
communication par
support
rapport à ça, entre
also
autres.
providing
On
communication
continue à travailler sur le
materials on the
sujet.
subject. We're continuing to work
On
on
a
the
un
subject
bâtiment dit
today.
démonstrateur, mais qui
We have
nous a
a
permis de faire
demonstrator
des
building,
démonstrateurs dans le
if I can
sens que
call it
ça a
that,
permis de tester des éléments.
where we can
Et comme tout
test
démonstrateur,
different
vous
systems, and like
en
any
tirez des enseignements,
demonstrator,
bien évidemment,
you learn
positifs.
lessons
Et
from
puis,
it,
vous mesurez
positive things,
aussi
and you
l'ampleur
also
du chemin à
see
parcourir
how
et l'ampleur
far
du
you
chemin qui
still
reste encore à
have
parcourir.
to go.
À plusieurs niveaux d'ailleurs. Hein. Voilà, comment on aborde ce type de bâtiment, comment c'est mis. Donc, on continue sur ça, bien évidemment. On essaie d'amener... Vous voyez, on a beaucoup travaillé sur le champ-chambre pour la ville, pour revenir surtout à un rapport de proximité sur des matériaux isolants, en disant le placo n'est pas une réponse systématique. Elle ne peut plus être une réponse systématique. Elle ne permet pas de juger de l'évolution du bâtiment sur lui-même. Enfin, voilà. Il faut arrêter de faire ça en systématique. Un bâti ancien, il faut adapter son intervention en fonction de ce qu'il est, de ses matériaux. Donc, tout ce travail sur les matériaux se poursuit avec l'école d'ingénierie de Toulouse, avec l'INSAT. On continue à travailler sur ça. Il y a un programme sur les architectes qui travaillent sur le thème du matériau lui-même, qui travaillent sur la thématique, pour voir comment apporter des améliorations à plus d'un titre, mais surtout en étant sur des matériaux dont on pourrait avoir une production locale. Ce qui nous a intéressé dans l'emploi du chaud-chambre, c'est que le chambre, historiquement, et au niveau de la nature des sols que l'on a dans notre région qui s'appelle le Quercy, est une culture historique. Ce sont des sols qui sont pauvres et on peut cultiver du chanvre. Après, il faut beaucoup d'apport d'eau, c'est quand on travaille le chanvre après, quand on le traite. Mais dans une culture, on peut avoir des cultures de proximité qui seraient importantes. Voilà, c'est retravailler sur ces éléments-là. Et là, c'était un attendu fort de ce programme européen, mais dans lequel on continue à avancer par rapport à ça. Je vous ai répondu.
Laure, I will pass on two other questions which have come on. One from Croatia about the medieval tower houses that we saw. Did the inventory of those, is there more information available about those houses?
La complexité que l'on a par rapport à ces maisons tours, c'est qu'en fait, on a pu les repérer comme étant appartenant à cette catégorie de maisons tours, de bâtiments un peu particuliers, qui ont des petits côtés qui ressemblent à des tours, alors qu'en fait, ce sont des bâtiments qui sont très très profonds dans la parcelle.
They look like small towers, but in fact the buildings are very, very deep and long. And the complex issue we have in Cahors is that for the moment, one of them has been totally disfigured in the 20th century.
Donc, on fonde nos espoirs sur la deuxième, celle qui est plus à droite, qui elle a fait l'objet d'une protection monument historique, qui appartient à un seul propriétaire, alors qui n'est pas le cas de l'autre, et dont on espère pouvoir avancer sur un projet global un jour qui permettra de mieux l'étudier, de l'étudier, parce qu'à ce moment-là, on pourra procéder à des démontages de cloisons qui sont lues par la suite, où on pourra réellement utiliser le bâtiment. Donc, pour l'instant, en effet, on a très peu d'informations historiques et archéologiques sur ce bâtiment.
Historic and archaeological information about those buildings. And three other questions on a very similar subject, the question of the restoration and the incentives. Before we hand over to the final speaker of the day, Konstantin Dmitrovsky, who has joined us now. So who handles the restoration if the owner doesn't have the financial resources? Have you had owners who have refused to restore their buildings? And do you demand a financial participation from the owners of the buildings? And a similar question for those buildings or premises which have business activities, companies or crafts activities. Do you demand a business plan before you start the work?
Par rapport aux propriétaires, parce qu'en fait, dans les exemples que je vous ai montrés, les propriétaires n'ont pas des moyens financiers considérables. Et même pour le deuxième exemple, on est loin de là. Bien sûr, c'est pour ça qu'on mobilise. Alors déjà, pour les aides sur la restauration et l'intervention sur les façades, et pour des restitutions de baies, d'éléments anciens particuliers, là, on a une forte mobilisation financière puisqu'on finance jusqu'à 50% du montant global des travaux, de leur montant hors taxe, du montant global des travaux qui vont concerner restitution des avant-toits qui sont typologiquement des éléments qui mettaient en place pendant toute l'époque médiévale qui permettaient de protéger les façades. Donc déjà, réglementairement, la restitution des avant-toits fait l'objet de financements pour les remettre en place quand ils ne sont pas ou pour les restaurer quand ils existent. On intervient sur tout ce qui est maçonnerie, donc les murs eux-mêmes, piquage des enduits existants, les joints si on reste en matériaux apparents, la restitution des baies, les menuiseries spécifiques pour la restitution des baies, l'ensemble des menuiseries, leur remise en teinte, les interventions sur les rez-de-chaussée, les interventions sur les portes. Enfin, voilà, il y a un ensemble, il y a un bouquet de travaux, il y a un ensemble de travaux très importants qui font l'objet de financement à 50%. Pour les travaux intérieurs, on couple ça. Alors, dans les cas où ils veulent des aides, où ils vont faire, et là aussi le logement social, et pour revenir à la question que José avait posée tout à l'heure par rapport aux logements sociaux, une ville comme Cahors, 80% des gens qui travaillent et des habitants sont éligibles à du logement social, en fait, du point de vue des revenus. Donc, après, il y a des nuances dans le logement social. Après, vous avez le social, il y a plein de nuances à porter. Mais au logement social, 80% de la population est éligible. Donc, souvent, on peut être sur des dispositifs qui sont... et puis, on est dans le cadre à l'heure actuelle d'un dispositif qui est, on est retenu parmi les 222 villes d'Action Cœur de Ville, qui sont les dispositifs mis en place par l'État avec la forte implication d'Action Logement. Et là aussi, ça fait partie de ces dispositifs qui sont des bras armés de l'État, qui apportent des soutiens financiers particuliers si les logements sont à destination de salariés du privé. Donc, en couplant toutes les aides possibles, l'opération programmée amélioration de l'habitat avec l'Agence nationale d'amélioration de l'habitat qui apporte des financements. Les financements et les aides apportées par Action Logement. Les aides complémentaires que les collectivités apportent sur l'amélioration énergétique, qui vient en complément des aides d'amélioration énergétique apportées par la région. Les aides du département. On peut arriver à avoir une combinaison d'aides de différents acteurs, de différents partenaires publics sur différents usages qui amènent des compléments de financement et qui font qu'au final, le reste à charge qui va rester pour le propriétaire est moins élevé que ce qui lui serait resté s'il avait fait à minima des travaux. C'est comme ça qu'on y arrive, en fait. L'autre question, c'était quoi?
What was the other question? No, I think there, I'm just looking. And when there are buildings where there will be business activities or crafts activities, do you ask for a business plan before you start the work? No, not at all.
Parce que, alors, les travaux les travaux déjà, les travaux concernant souvent les activités économiques, elles sont au rez-de-chaussée. Donc en fait, ça ne va concerner qu'un élément d'un ensemble plus conséquent qui, lui, à plus de 80% est destiné à de l'habitat. Donc la partie en rez-de-chaussée, il y a une partie de travaux qui incombe au propriétaire, qui n'est pas forcément l'exploitant économique. Lui a souvent que l'exploitation au titre de son activité économique, qui n'est pas forcément propriétaire des murs. Donc lui, il sera concerné que par l'intervention sur les menuiseries ou des éléments d'aménagement intérieur, mais c'est souvent du mobilier, c'est plus léger. Et en effet, on ne demande pas de déplacement. À part dans des opérations très particulières.
And two other questions from the chat before we move over to Constantine. A question in English from China. As we saw in the presentation, the restoration projects, which are often private houses, how does the government or whatever, the local authority or cultural agency coordinate with the owner to ensure, while respecting the rights of the owner? And what about, are there any architects or engineers who are volunteers to take part in this sort of rehabilitation work? Is it possible to have architects or engineers who take part in this sort of thing? I'll begin with the last question.
Alors, vous êtes bienvenus, bien sûr. prenez
course,
contact avec
anybody
nous,
is
bien
welcome.
entendu,
Get in touch
dans
with
le cadre des
us.
relations,
Anyone,
en passant par Cités, hein, comme
if you go
intermédiaire,
through
mais
Cités,
bien
there are
sûr,
all sorts of
on est un terrain de
possibilities
jeu, en
where
fait, hein, et le
we
jeu
can
dans
be
le
a
sens
sort of
très positif
playground
de la
for you
chose.
in a very
On est
positive
vraiment un
way.
terrain d'expérimentation.
We're
On doit
really a
pouvoir
place where
tester,
you
et
can
plus
experiment,
on
we
a
can
de
test
contributions,
things, and the more
plus on peut croiser
contributions
les
we
regards
have,
et les approches,
the more different
plus
views and
on
different
enrichit
approaches we can have, the
la
more
vision, nos
we can
interventions, les
enrich
uns
the
comme
vision
les
of our
autres, en fait. Hein. On
participants and
s'enrichit
enrich each
mutuellement.
other's
Donc,
vision.
en effet, c'est très important.
And that's
Par
very
rapport
important.
au porté à connaissance pour les propriétaires
For
et la
the
répartition entre
owners
l'impact des
and
uns et des autres.
the
D'abord,
role of the
quand vous êtes
different
sur un
parties,
site patrimonial
when
remarquable,
you have a remarkable
les anciens secteurs
heritage
sauvegardés,
site, the
en
former
fait,
protected
tout est soumis à
districts,
autorisation.
everything is
Travaux
subject to an
intérieurs comme travaux extérieurs.
authorization, even
C'est le
work on the
seul, en
inside of
fait,
the
règlement
building.
d'urbanisme. Il fonctionne comme ça.
That's how
Et
it
en France,
works.
alors j'ai peut-être pas
And
mon
in
chiffre qui est tout à
France,
fait à jour, mais en France, logiquement, il n'y a que 112 secteurs
logically,
sauvegardés.
there are only
Donc
112
112,
protected
alors je ne vais pas dire
districts
villes,
like
parce que des
this.
fois, il y a des villes qui ont 2 secteurs sauvegardés comme Paris, mais voilà, il y a 112 secteurs
There are
sauvegardés. Ce
112
qui est
of these
excessivement
protected
peu.
districts, which is
Ce
only a
qui
very
entraîne
small
souvent la
amount.
complexité, et d'où notre travail quotidien
Hence our
de
work
rencontre avec des propriétaires.
to meet the
Mais c'est vraiment
owners,
quotidien, hein, de leur
really day
expliquer
to day, and to
que
explain to them
c'est très particulier en effet, mais que ce
that
rapport à la
it's
propriété privée, il faut
this
qu'ils deviennent
relationship
acteurs
with
de cette
private
nécessité de
ownership
connaissance.
is very particular. They
Parce
have
que
to
bien
become an
sûr, on va être
active
très
player
intrusif.
in the
Bien
project.
sûr, on va
We
rentrer chez
will be
eux.
very
Et bien sûr,
intrusive.
on va
We're
leur
going to
dire
be going
non.
into their house. There are things where we will
Oui,
say
mais
no,
pour des
or
travaux
yes, you
intérieurs.
can,
Et
but
que le
for the
rapport à la
work on their
propriété,
house.
au rapport à la
And
propriété
the
privée
relationship
va être un
with
peu
the private
bousculé
owners is
à
going to
cause
be
de
a
ça.
little bit
Parce qu'en effet,
disrupted
on peut
by this
totalement
because
rentrer et
we
aller
can
très loin
go in
dans
and we
une
can
démarche
go
sur un
very
projet
far
d'aménagement intérieur. Alors, pas sur l'atteinte du papier peint,
on
ni sur
the
le choix de la couleur de la cuisine, ni
interior.
sur
We
le
can't
mobilier,
tell them
bien
what
entendu.
color kitchen or
Mais
what color
que le
furniture
fait
they
d'avoir
must
une
have,
approche
but
de
in their
connaissance d'un
approach
bien
and in the
servira à un moment donné
knowledge
leur
of the
projet.
building, that we
Et il faut
can be very
positiver ce
intrusive,
côté très
but you have
intrusif. Et
to
en effet,
turn
comme il
this
y a
in a
peu de
positive
territoires qui
way.
fonctionnent comme ça,
But as there
c'est
are very few
ressenti au premier
districts
abord comme
like
échec.
this, people do see this
Donc,
as rather
en fait,
intrusive.
on essaie
But we
d'avoir une seule
try
entrée ou
to
que les entrées des différents
have
organismes,
one
que ce soit
contact
l'État avec
person
les services
or
de
a
la culture,
one-stop shop
que
for
ce
the
soit la ville
contacts
au
with
titre
the
du
owners,
patrimoine, que
either
ce
through the
soit
town
les opérateurs qui interviennent dans le cadre d'opérations d'amélioration de l'habitat,
for the different
qu'à
operations
chaque
which are
fois, si les
conducted.
gens
So if
contactent soit l'un, soit l'autre,
the people
que
contact
chaque fois,
the
il ait les
different
3 interlocuteurs.
organizations, we try to make sure
L'objectif, c'est
that
que tout le monde
everyone is
parle
present,
dans
but
son
everybody
domaine de la même
talks
voix. En
together,
tout cas, pour les
everybody
services de l'État et pour nous,
speaks in a single
on
voice, the
passe en
different
revue
state
3 fois par semaine
participants.
l'ensemble des dossiers. On
And
va
each
faire les visites
week,
préalables
we look
ensemble.
at all the different
Et en effet,
files, we
pour
make
arriver à
visits
montrer à un
together
propriétaire
to try
qu'à un
to
moment
show
donné,
the
on va
owners
parler
that
d'une
at
seule
some
voix et
point
qu'on est là
we will
pour qu'ils deviennent
all
acteurs aussi de
speak
son
with a
bien et
single
qu'ils
voice,
prennent
and
la
they
mesure
can
de
play an
l'importance du
active
bien
role,
qu'il vient
and they
d'acheter ou
need
qu'il a
to
depuis longtemps.
understand the
Il y a
importance
ça aussi,
of their
la
house
propriété.
or their property.
Donc on essaie d'avoir
So
au
we
bout d'un moment que
try
tout le monde
to
parle de
make
la même
sure that
manière d'un bien.
everybody talks in a
Je
single
ne sais pas si j'ai
voice.
vraiment répondu. Mais...
I don't know if I've really answered your question, but thank you very much. Thank you, Laure, for your presentation and for those detailed answers to the questions. I suggest now that we finish today's proceedings. Thank you.
Merci à vous.
And you can stay with us to follow the next presentation, which will be focused on the inventory of a particular heritage of the Bazaar of Skopje. It's a project conducted very actively by Konstantin Dimitrovsky, who is there with us, who is an engineer and architect in charge of the inventory at the National Center for Conservation in Skopje, which is in the Republic of North Macedonia, and who worked on this inventory of the heritage of the bazaar, very interesting, and a project on which Cités Remarquables worked with the Republic of North Macedonia. It was a few years ago now. And if I have understood, Konstantin, you are going to be doing us the honor of speaking in French. So I'll hand over to you, and you will also have some pictures to show us, I believe. Hello, everybody. Jonathan, I have a presentation on the subject of the inventory of the old bazaar in Skopje. And if possible, I am going to try to share the screen.
Oui, tout à fait. En bas, donc partager l'écran ou share screen en vert. Tu vas avoir
Yeah, you should have that at the bottom of the screen, marked in green, share screen. You should be able to select your PowerPoint or your PDF that you have. You have to open the presentation beforehand. It's in PDF format. That's possible, yes, but it must be open first. You need to open the file first, open the PDF file first, and then afterwards share the screen and select. For the moment, we can't see it. No, we can't see it for the moment.
Alors, il faut ouvrir le fichier PDF.
You need to open the PDF file beforehand, then go back into Zoom and share the screen. But you open the PDF file first before you go back into Zoom. I'm sorry.
Sinon, Constantine, est-ce que tu peux m'envoyer le...
Otherwise, Constantine, can you send me the file? If it's not too heavy, send it to me by email. Begin your presentation, and I will put it up on the screen if you can send it to me. So as soon as I've received it, I'll put it up on the screen. Okay. Just one moment, please.
Je crois qu'on a perdu Constantine.
And I think we've lost Constantine now.
Ça permet à notre interprète de se reposer la voix peut-être.
This will give our interpreter a chance to have a rest.
Salut Jonathan.
Ah oui, Georges.
Jonathan?
Oui.
Oui, tu sais, les deux premières communications, moi, je n'ai pas vu les PowerPoint passer. Hein. Seulement, c'était un écran noir à bon niveau.
For me, I didn't see the presentations for the first two presentations. Yes, there was a problem because there were PowerPoints which were displayed, Georges. So if you couldn't see them, you had a technical problem. I didn't see that at all. Well, I'm sorry about that. I could hear, everything was okay, but I couldn't see the presentations. I perhaps need to, if you could send me the presentations, that would be handy.
Vous pouvez donner celui de la région à qui veut, hein, il n'y a pas de problème.
Jonathan, if you want, you can distribute our presentations freely. In any case, the workshop is recorded and we'll send you the links, and that way you will have the voice and the images. So Constantine is back with us.
Oui, allez-y. Ah, ah oui, si. Oui. D'accord, c'est de ma faute. Alors, ouais.
Ah, ok. Maintenant. It's okay.
Exactement.
Yes, now it works. I've just seen that.
C'est parfait. Ça s'affiche.
Perfect. We can see that, Constantine. I'll now let you speak. I apologize. So the identity and the character of the town is expressed mainly through the ancient center of the town. The old bazaar of Skopje is part of the urban center, which is complex, with buildings from several centuries ago. Those buildings form a morphological core around which the bazaar developed through the centuries until it reached its form. In terms of typology, the old bazaar is one of the complex bazaars with a medieval oriental character. The former market of Skopje was in the center of the old bazaar, connected to the caravanserai, with covered walkways with stalls down each side, and external walls. Under the Ottoman Empire, it was the nerve center of the district, and the structure remained in place for several centuries. It was only later that the stalls extended all the way to the atrium, and then the process of disappearance began. In the study of the urban development of Skopje, there are specific features which explain the destruction, such as earthquakes or fires caused by military conflict. Often after the disasters, there was a new phase of rebuilding and reconstruction of the town in a more intensive way, shaped by the socio-economic conditions. So, after the earthquake in 1963, the city of Skopje was rebuilt and extended. In the planning work and the reconstruction of the town, the managers paid particular attention to revitalizing the historic center, the bazaar. The idea was to blend the bazaar into the new urban fabric and the modern life of the city. It was at this time that there was the first detailed urbanism plan for the old bazaar of Skopje. Today, we might think that the plan is radical, but back in those days, it offered a varied range of interesting solutions which had been thought through for certain parts of that urban core. On the basis of these plans, considerable infrastructure work was carried out. The project contained several constructions with their characteristics and volume, which are integrated well into the general atmosphere of the bazaar. However, from the 1980s onwards, there was a lot of large-scale works in this part of the town. The idea of opening up large roads and boulevards was pursued, and traditional districts were thus totally destroyed for the benefit of a new urbanism, to the detriment of the old structures, with large ensemble of buildings, and neglecting this part of the town. The part of the old bazaar disappeared at this time, giving way to new buildings. And a lot of damage was caused, and they continued to depersonalize and to dismantle the former prestige of the urban fabric. So the inconsistency in the urban plan and the failure to comply with the legal provisions led to the emergence of the appearance of a number of unsuitable buildings with characteristics which absolutely did not fit in with this large protected area. Then, for the process of deterioration of this old district led in 2006 to a study to try to see how the old Bazaar of Skopje could be promoted and developed. And it was with this study that began a new interpretation of the values of the bazaar. And in this context, in 2007, there was the Franco-Macedonian project to carry out an inventory in the bazaar of the city. We began by carrying this out by creating a structure defining the differences between the situation in 1929 and the situation at present. And on the basis of that data, we conducted detailed research and also looked into the artifacts, the construction, the objectives, the property system, the contents of the buildings themselves, different materials, floors, levels, dangers, authentic nature of the buildings, and the current state of those buildings, etc. The result that was obtained then served as the basis for the definition of a protection system of the urban blocks, with information about the buildings contained in them and the monuments. For the first time, thanks to this study, the old bazaar was given the status of a monumental unit with a special and appropriate protection system. In parallel with this activity, through the cooperation bilateral cooperation between Macedonia and France through the Ministry for Culture. The Old Bazaar Inventory Project was launched. The bilateral cooperation between the town of Angoulême and in France and the town of Skopje and the National Association of Towns of Art and History and of Protected Districts comprised the conduct of a detailed inventory of the heritage in the Old Bazaar of Skopje. We worked on a study which demanded a clearly defined scale to conduct the inventory of the heritage in a very precise and systematic way, block by block, or part by part, building by building. Then we drafted a report which showed the development, the historic urban development and social development of this old part of the city, and which made suggestions for the development of certain buildings and the possibilities for restoration, modification, changes, or new constructions. That work aimed to propose measures to change, to make changes that were necessary, or indicating also the buildings which were in a bad condition. It was very important to draft a document that could combine all the knowledge to have a better understanding of the information and the development, the evolution of this heritage over the years, and to respect the old bazaar of Skopje. We can say that this document summarizes the information that is useful. With a systematic analysis of the buildings, we can confirm the architectural types, recognize the type of changes that have been made, and confirm the conditions that might apply for their redevelopment. This work method obliged us to look more closely, to observe and to analyze, understand the city as a whole and its urban landscape, to better understand the conditions of the buildings and the old buildings, which have undergone changes over the years, over the centuries, or which have been marked by transformations which sometimes are irreparable, and other changes made after the earthquake in 1963. This analysis showed us the deterioration of the heritage in the Old Bazaar and the buildings on which we can work are identified, and a work plan has been defined by the Conservation Institution. We have defined an inventory form based on a French template model with an analysis of each building in several respects: historic, cultural heritage, architecture, etc., with an evaluation of the quality of each building from an urban point of view and also from a cultural heritage point of view. Sorry to interrupt you, Constantine. Just to inform you, you have 5 minutes left for your presentation. I'm saying that because your presentation has 128 slides. I don't know if you're wanting to show all of them, but it's just to say you have 5 minutes left and you're only on page 20. So just to stick to time, okay? So the objective of this was to participate directly, to contribute directly to a rediscovery of the values of each house that makes up the main part of the buildings in the bazaar, while analyzing the buildings in detail from the macro structure to the micro structure, revealing at the same time the authentic features and the things that might have caused processes of deterioration of the buildings. And all that work was presented in a form created on the basis of experience in other experiments in other European countries. So for the old bazaar of Skopje, which is cultural, the cultural heritage is very important was listed as cultural heritage at the end of 2008, which was a key step forward, and expressed the determination, the intention, the operational intention to change the situation for the better. And for this, the revitalization program defined by the same law with a document which is intended to guide the activity. The objectives are to make a success of the revitalization of the old bazaar and to guide the longer-term development of the potential of the bazaar and also using the different possibilities at different levels with decentralization and to see what promotion can be done to revitalize the bazaar and to facilitate the operationalization of targeted operations to defining new methods of management for urban development to revitalize the bazaar through the different legal mechanisms that exist and with the help of the institutions. Through the implementation of this activity, we should be able to foster the sustainable economic development and the promotion of the heritage, the cultural heritage, architectural heritage, and urban and crafts heritage of the bazaar, and to develop other complementary activities to contribute to the atmosphere of the bazaar and the city of Skopje as a whole. So we'll also be defining the different alternatives that exist to homogenize the territory that has been destroyed and the function of the bazaar to preserve the unity of the space, pending the preparation of a new plan for the old bazaar. And in 2015, new rules were presented to identify the urban architectural value requiring preservation in planning documents and the typical and morphological values of the bazaar, the values of its network of streets and squares and extensions, and also the value of the architecture, medieval architecture, monumental architecture, and religious architecture, and the archaeological remains, as a means of introducing a protection policy and protection measures for the physical structure of the bazaar and the buildings, the endangered buildings, and the treatment of the urban blocks in the frontages of the building and the covered or open spaces. So measures of urban spatial coherence will be introduced, and the traditional functions and values of the space will be complemented by new functions and new values to ensure functional consistency with a connection between the bazaar and the city of Skopje as a whole in a balanced manner to allow economic development of the area. The intention of the project is not only to meet the demands imposed by the new legislation in these matters, but above all, a desire to create a solid basis from which a new plan, which is slightly different, can be defined for the old bazaar based on the information about the actual value of this part of the urban center of the city of Skopje, and to respect this nature. Most importantly, the inventory underlying these planning documents is also a tool and a method for learning and educating the direct users of the spaces in the bazaar, the stall keepers themselves, who can become aware of the real meaning of their buildings and of the space where they work and live in such a way as to encourage creativity, all of this based on the long tradition of commerce, crafts, and a social life which has existed here for centuries in this significant part of the center of the old town of Skopje. Thank you. Thank you, Constantin, for that very interesting presentation. It shows the importance of the inventory, which fits in with the urban project. As you said several times, the aim was not just to be familiar with the heritage, it was to try to preserve it, to promote it. And I would be interested to know whether today, as this is work that was done by your institution, representing the Ministry for the Culture, I'd be interested in knowing how the city made use or took up this subject itself. I don't know if you can say more about that, Constantin, or not. Could you possibly So the question is, has the city of Skopje, the municipality of Skopje, been working with you on this knowledge of the heritage and preserving that heritage. Yes, it's very important because in this very complex work, there are a lot of participants, the city of Skopje, the Ministry for Culture, the craftspeople, the institution working within the Ministry for Culture, the National Center for Conservation, and we have a very complicated situation, but I think there's every chance that we will manage to produce new detailed plans for the Old Bazaar, because the basis of the plan
inventaire.
Oui.
La base.
is based on this inventory. All the documents and for the inventory. Thank you. Another question, Constantine, or perhaps how did the local population, the people who live in the bazaar, how were they involved in the project? Our institution working at the national, as our institution, we have a team and there are several architects, historians who work on this with us. And also the Ministry for Culture. And I think the craftspeople, the tradespeople as well, who work in the Old Bazaar. Thank you. Thank you very much, Constantine, for that presentation. I'm looking to see if there are any questions. A question perhaps that you will be able to answer from Insaf Sersar. I know the answer, but I'll ask you anyway. Was there a Turkish presence in the region? Because we saw a mosque on the photographs. The old town, the bazaar, the whole concept is typically Oriental. Because in the Old Bazaar there are several mosques, also churches. There's the caravanserai as well. So it's very typical of the urbanism, Oriental urbanism of the time. And in this central district, these are, I would say, the key urban features, these buildings in the urban center are built around these monuments. Just to explain, for Insaf, who asked the question, the Ottoman occupation of that part of Europe in the Balkans lasted about 500 years, from the end of the 14th century, depending on the region, through to the beginning of the 20th century. So it was a long period of Ottoman presence, as Koki said. Koki is the nickname of Constantine, I should say. You'll see it in the comments there in the chat. So with the mosques and bazaars and the caravans, which we find in Skopje, but which you also find in other territories of the Balkans, in Albania, of course, also in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Bulgaria, etc., etc. I think Sabina had a question. Perhaps I should hand. Sabina, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, I have a lot of questions. Unfortunately, just a little time. I'm come from Travnik, from Bosnia. We have similar history and similar architecture, and I'm sure that we face similar problems in dealing with heritage every day. First question is for this scope of work that Konstantin and his team did. For example, if we tried that here in Travnik, it would have to go, because of the law, to the public purchase or tender. And the cheapest company or atelier or whatever wins the tender and does the job, which does not ensure the quality of the work. And we face a lot of problems and issues with this, from planning, from designing, from inventorying, up to the, well, when we come to construction works in particular. Did North Macedonia face similar problems? If they did, how they managed to overcome them?
Yes, we have a same
I hope
problem.
you understood the question.
We have a same problem, because this is the same heritage, the same people who live and who work in this place. And I think that today my presentation is about inventarization. This is inventarization is like some days, but like a little child opposite this big problem when we try to realize conservation and reconstruction, etc. So we have the same problems. The problems are very difficult, because in inventarisation, c'est le premier, this is the first step. After that, the problems are here, because all the plan documents when we work on plans or on regimes for protection, we always have a big problem with
megalomany.
Megalomany, yes. This is, I think that is typical for our region, Albania, Serbia, Bosnia Herzegovina, etc. This term megalomany. Because conservation is modest work. This is something, some intellectual, some philosophical and artisan meaning, not in a field of megalomany. People always try to broke this regime for protection, and we have also very big problems. But I don't know. We try to find some solution. I don't know what is situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but this is a very big problem.
It's a very big problem in Bosnia too. I mean, we don't have much time to cover it all, but I hope we will stay in touch after this and share experience.
Yes.
And thank you very much for the lovely presentation, and congratulations of the great job, because I know what problems you faced to do this, and seriously, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Constantin.
Thank you very much, Constantin, for that presentation. And I see the comments in the chat. I suggest there have been requests. At the end of the international training, I will be sending the contact details, the names and email addresses of all the speakers, all the participants. So if you want to get in touch with different people on the different themes, and if there are any requests for cooperation or for networking, either directly with Cités or with the local authorities taking part, of course, we will be able to answer those requests and pass on the information. It is 4:45, so I propose that we put an end to the session. Tomorrow we'll be looking in more detail. Friday, not tomorrow. Sorry. My apologies. Tomorrow we have a board meeting, so and our general meeting, so we won't have training tomorrow. So on Friday, 4th of December, thank you, Solène, for correcting me, we will be addressing the question of the inventory and archaeological heritage. I know that's of interest to a certain number of local authorities, like in Lebanon, where you have some specialists, and the inventory of landscapes also we'll be looking at, which we've started addressing, and also the issue of a participatory inventory. We've seen professional work here, but the population also can play a role in the inventory, and we will present that on Friday. And then an example of the inventory in the old town of Lamu in Kenya, with Mohamed Ali Mwenje, who is the manager of that UNESCO World Heritage listed site, who will be giving a presentation then. So I wish you all an excellent day or evening. You have been following us from different continents. Thank you for staying with us, and I'll see you all on Friday the 4th at 2 p.m. using the same link for the meeting.